Truth is stranger than fiction. I'd heard the saying before, but nothing prepared me for the absurdity of what was to come. My name is Sarah, and I had an experience that defies belief. I met my boyfriend, David, through a mutual friend, and after dating for just over a year, it seemed only natural that we get married. As we settled into our new life together, I moved into his apartment and started organizing our things. We were on the brink of submitting our marriage registration when I was suddenly struck down with a fever and diagnosed with the flu at the hospital. David, ever the reliable partner, assured me, "I'll handle the marriage registration." Trusting him, I left it in his hands. Hours later, I heard David's voice and then a sweet female voice calling out, "David." A wave of concern hit me. Had he brought another woman home while I was sick? But no, it wasn't a fever-induced delusion. David had come back with his mother. She marched straight to our bedroom and called out, "Sarah, aren't you coming out to greet me?" As if demanding a welcome from someone who was clearly unwell. What kind of person was she? I pretended to be asleep, hoping to avoid further confrontation, but her next move was even worse. She yanked the blanket off me and scolded, "You're still in your pajamas." Of course, I was still in my pajamas, because I was sick. "Get up and change immediately. You look disgraceful," she ordered, trying to pull me out of bed. "Please leave me alone. I have the flu and it's contagious," I pleaded, my voice a mix of frustration and panic. Where was David during all this? From the living room, I could hear the loud sound of the TV and his laughter echoing along with a comedy show. "David, your mother is practically attacking your wife. Is this how you treat your wife? Unbelievable. Fine, if you're too sick to cook, I'll handle David's meal. Be grateful, you useless fool," she shouted before storming out. Her cruelty towards someone who was bedridden was nothing short of wicked. "David, I'm making your dinner, okay?" I overheard her say. Exhausted by the heated exchange, I felt utterly drained. "If you heard, why didn't you stop her?" My frustration with David only grew as he failed to intervene and allowed his mother's relentless abuse to continue. Unable to find peace, it took 5 long days for my fever to finally subside. I couldn't help but regret agreeing to marry him. I miss my single life deeply. After a 2-day rest, I returned to work and informed my boss that I was married. With no wedding ceremony planned, I only notified him and the HR department. At work, being something of a loner, my only close contact was Anna, who worked in HR. "Congratulations on your marriage. A week off for the honeymoon? I'm so envious." Anna's teasing smile made me sigh. "I just got hit with the flu and had to endure torment from my mother-in-law." "What? That's hilariously tragic," she said, though I didn't find it amusing at all. She then gave me some instructions. "It's been a week since you filed your marriage registration. You should be able to get some paperwork with your new name and address on it. Go get that sorted and let me know so I can update your details in our system." I listened, trying to keep a serious expression. At that moment, all I could think about was getting a divorce. I hadn't anticipated such a shocking turn of events. After work, I went straight to City Hall to request the paperwork. I was advised to collect it. However, when I looked at the document, I saw my maiden name still printed on it. "What does this mean?" I texted Anna urgently. "The paperwork still has my maiden name. What's going on?" She replied almost immediately, "I don't think your marriage has been registered." Don't tell me, I thought, realizing that what I believed to be a marriage might have been just a figment of my imagination. "I think you're right." Shocking, isn't it? Anna seemed frustrated by the back and forth messages and called me directly. "You haven't been scammed out of money, have you?" "No, the only thing I've lost is my peace of mind. Just in case, you should apply for an annulment. Your husband might be a con artist." "A con artist? The person I've been with for over a year? A con artist?" It seemed extreme, but with his mother's behavior, it wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. Taking Anna's advice to heart, I went ahead and applied for an annulment of my marriage. "Aren't you shocked?" Anna asked, still on the phone. I stared blankly into space. Logically, being betrayed by your partner should be shocking, but after enduring David's mother's bullying while I was sick and seeing David act like a mama's boy, I'd surprisingly realized that I no longer loved him. The treatment I received from his mother made it clear that staying in that situation wouldn't be good for me. "If you're okay, that's good to hear. But what about your boyfriend? What was going on with him?" I, too, was curious about his intentions. There had to be more to it, something that would be exposed as soon as the marriage registration was checked, just like it was today. David is 27 and has a decent job. He must have known his deception would come to light quickly. Maybe there was more to this. Perhaps he was committing marriage fraud. Maybe he was testing me. If I couldn't figure it out, it would make me a perfect target for scammers. I was deeply offended to be treated like such a fool. I couldn't forgive David for what he'd done. Fueled by anger, I made a decision. I boasted to Anna about my plan, but what I actually managed to do was quite mundane. I recorded conversations and watched the footage of David and his mother. It felt as though I was the one committing a crime. After about 3 days of this, all I had captured was more of his mother's bullying and the usual conversations between the mama's boy and his mother. My interest waned, and I grew bored with the lack of solid evidence. Being the detective wasn't as easy as it seemed. Little did I know, an unexpected turn of events was about to unfold later that very day. At dinner, as I choked down his mother's bland beef stew and endured her usual verbal attacks, I must have looked emotionally drained. Seeing my defeated state, his mother smirked with satisfaction and let out a chuckle. "You've seemed unhappy ever since you got married, Sarah. But you know, it's because you're not fulfilling your duties as a wife, so I'm here to teach you. You should be grateful for that." I could barely muster the energy to respond. What kind of answer was that? What a terrible woman David's mother was. It was fortunate, in a way, that she wasn't my mother-in-law. Wait, did she know I wasn't actually married to David? Was she bullying me despite knowing I wasn't her daughter-in-law? "Mom, oops, I let it slip. My bad," she said, fake coughing and casting a sidelong glance at me. "Let me explain. David and I had a plan for our happiness." What? This was an unexpected twist. I had assumed David was acting alone, but it turned out his mother was involved in the deception as well. Did they realize I was investigating? What does she mean by our happiness? Intrigued by this dramatic development, I listened closely. "You seem to be in the dark, so let me clarify. Your marriage registration was never filed. This means you and David are still just strangers." Yes, I knew that. It was my decision to go along with it, though I felt guilty. I did it because Mom instructed me. We wanted to see if you were truly right for David. If you turned out to be unsuitable, he could simply have a child with you and then leave. This way, we wouldn't sully our family records. They wanted a child, not my money. What exactly are you saying? The reason we didn't file your marriage registration was that we were testing you to determine if you'd make a good wife. What was that? Could any novel have such a dull plot? All my efforts over the past 3 days had amounted to nothing. Feeling defeated, I headed to our bedroom, where I had already packed my bags in case I needed to make a quick escape if my eavesdropping was discovered. As I gathered my things, David rushed over in a panic. "I never meant to hurt your feelings." "It's okay. Goodbye," I said, avoiding his gaze. What more could I say? Was I really involved with a con artist? It felt like something out of a fiction movie. When I unexpectedly returned home, my parents were stunned. As I recounted the events, they were left speechless, their mouths hanging open. Given the late hour, they told me to get some rest, treating me with an unusual degree of concern. The next day was Sunday, and I spent the night letting off steam at a nearby pub with Anna and a few other friends. By the following morning, I was over it, though I had no idea what awaited me. That Monday night, the doorbell rang at my parents' house, and my father's angry voice boomed through the house. "Get out." I rushed downstairs to find David standing at the entrance with his mother looming behind him. "Sarah, you need to listen to me," David pleaded, pushing past my father. "Why should I? Everything was fine when we were dating, wasn't it?" "Just hear me out," David began. Apparently, word had spread about how he treated me, thanks to a mutual friend. His coworkers, who were also friends of mine, had given him cold stares at work. When he pressed for an explanation, a colleague had confronted him with, "So, you committed blatant marriage fraud?" Now that I thought about it, one of David's coworkers had been at our all-night venting session. David seemed to believe that if he could win my forgiveness, he could also repair his damaged relationships with his colleagues. "I never meant to deceive you. I was planning to file our marriage registration in secret later on." "Really? You thought I wouldn't find out?" "You're not that clueless, are you?" I went to get some legal documents and found out immediately that David's claims were true. He genuinely didn't know about the registration issue. I felt foolish for suspecting something more sinister. As I stood there, stunned, his mother stormed in. "You knew about this and still stayed with David for a few days." Forgive him immediately, and then I'll consider you as my daughter-in-law. Honestly, I couldn't care less about your approval. Even if you begged, I wouldn't want to be your daughter-in-law. What did you just say? Your son is a mama's boy, and your cooking is awful. I'm fed up with your bullying and your petty sarcasm. What? I continued, watching his mother's face turn red with anger. You wanted me to have his child and not ruin the family's reputation. Isn't that a gross violation of my rights? Did you even think of me as a person with feelings, not just a tool? And don't you dare speak to my mother like that. Do you still not understand what's going on? What you did is called marriage fraud. I didn't do anything wrong. You wasted my precious time. Time is valuable, you fool. I nearly grabbed David by the collar, but my father stepped in. Sarah, that's enough. The neighbors are watching. I looked around to see that we had attracted quite a crowd, with neighbors clapping and cheering, "Go Sarah." Meanwhile, those who knew David and his mother were whispering and spreading rumors. I glared at the now pale David and his mother and threatened them. Don't ever come near here again. If I see either of you around my house, I'll call the police. As an afterthought, I added, David, I've recorded conversations of your mother bullying me. I'll be seeking compensation, so expect a call from my lawyer. I said this with a triumphant smile. After that, David's situation only worsened. He was ostracized and removed from team projects, relegated to a mundane role in the document management department, essentially a notice of redundancy. My gossip-loving mother filled me in on what happened to David's mother. During our confrontation at my parents' house, someone she knew was present, and soon they became infamous in the neighborhood as the Foster mother and son. They now lived a constrained life, constantly trying to avoid being seen. It was all a consequence of their own foolishness. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at how things turned out for David and his mother. I'm 29 years old, and I recently got a call from my mom. I hadn't talked to her in almost 5 years. She said she needed my help because my sister and her husband had just gone through a tragedy. Here's some background. The man who is now my sister's husband was once supposed to be my husband. My sister Melissa, who's 27, got together with my fiancé Lucas, 29, on the day of my engagement. Lucas and I had been together since college, and he proposed to me after almost 5 years of dating. He threw a surprise party for us on the night of our engagement. I remember feeling on top of the world until around 1 p.m. when I went out into the backyard for better reception and saw my sister all over Lucas. They were kissing so passionately that for the first couple of seconds, they didn't even notice me standing there shocked. I couldn't believe he would do this to me after nearly 5 years together, especially on the night of our engagement. When they finally noticed me, they broke apart instantly, but the damage was done. I ran to my car, drove to the nearest hotel, and hyperventilated from shock. I desperately hoped what I saw wasn't real. Then Melissa texted me, apologizing but confessing she was in love with Lucas, and this had been going on for a long time. I was alone in a hotel room when I got that text and broke down completely. Soon after, Lucas texted me with a similar apology, saying he proposed to me hoping it would help him forget Melissa. But it hadn't worked. He said it wasn't about me. They believed they were meant to be together. I realized I was just a temporary stand-in for Lucas until he could be with Melissa. I stayed at the hotel for a couple of days, trying to pull myself together. I felt like I was losing my mind, hoping this was all some cruel joke. After almost 4 days, I went back home because I needed to collect my things and couldn't risk losing my job. When I arrived home, I found out my family had been living with Lucas all this time, waiting for me to return. It would have been touching if it wasn't for how I had left. Everyone had been trying to reach me with texts while I was gone, but I hadn't responded to any of them. So when I finally returned, there was chaos. Everyone hugged me and told me how relieved they were to see me. Even Melissa came up to me, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tightly. I was too numb to react and stood there silently while everyone surrounded me. Finally, after everyone had settled down, I cleared my throat and explained that I had returned only to pack my things and leave for good. Lucas had been silent until then, but when I mentioned moving out, he spoke up, saying he had already packed and planned to move in with Melissa now that everything was out in the open. To my surprise, my family, my parents, my aunt, and my dad's youngest sister were all smiling broadly despite the situation. Even though I couldn't see any reason to smile, they seemed happy. Melissa stood beside Lucas in an awkward hug, looking at me sadly but with a smile on her face. I couldn't bear it any longer. I asked my family why they were smiling. From my perspective, Melissa had just broken up my engagement and taken my boyfriend of nearly 5 years. There was nothing funny or sweet about what had happened. At that moment, my mother decided to speak up. She said they couldn't change the past but could accept the future, which now included Melissa and Lucas together. Even though their relationship started with betrayal, they felt sorry about it but believed it was for the best. Melissa apologized for taking Lucas from me and expressed regret that I found out this way. She explained they were deeply in love and wanted to be together forever. Then, right in front of me, they kissed, and my mother even wiped a tear from her eye. I couldn't hold back. I told them this wasn't a sentimental moment and their actions were disgusting. To my surprise, my family seemed annoyed with me. They accused me of being bratty and self-centered. Instead of being happy for Melissa, they said I was making everything about myself, and they didn't approve of my behavior. I was shocked by their attitude and immediately demanded everyone leave my house. I couldn't believe they were defending Melissa and Lucas while making me out to be the villain. They acted like my feelings were an overreaction. My father intervened, telling me to stop acting like a child and accept that these things happen. He wanted me to celebrate Melissa finding her soulmate instead of feeling jealous. Their behavior seemed insane to me, and I couldn't handle it anymore. So I decided to leave again without speaking to them or listening to their pleas. Even as they called after me, I kept going. I felt like there was nothing left to say because it was clear they cared more about Melissa's happiness than about me or what was right. They were so focused on justifying Melissa's actions that they forgot I was a person with real emotions. After that day, my family tried reaching out to me multiple times, but I chose not to respond because I didn't feel I owed them anything. A few weeks later, I even received an invitation to Melissa and Lucas's wedding, which I declined, of course. Many of our mutual friends also turned down the invitation in solidarity with me. Even some relatives who knew the truth stopped interacting with my family after seeing how they treated me. It's been 5 years now, and I've mostly cut them out of my life completely. They occasionally tried to reconnect by sending me birthday or New Year wishes, but I always ignore them. I didn't block them, but I did remove them from my social media connections. Since my profiles are public, they can see what I'm doing, which is intentional. I want them to see that I'm living a great life and feel a pang of jealousy. It might be petty, but it's the least I can do after how they treated me. Until recently, I had little idea of what my family had been up to over the past few years. About 4 days ago, my mother called me from an unfamiliar number. When I recognized her voice, I almost hung up immediately. But she pleaded with me desperately for a chance to talk, saying they were in urgent need of help. Out of sheer humanity, I agreed to listen for a few minutes. She explained that Melissa and Lucas had started their own business a couple of years ago, but it was failing miserably. Investors were pulling out because of the lack of profit. They had borrowed more money in hopes of turning things around, but it only added to their debt. Now they were deeply in debt and facing pressure from loan sharks, employees, investors, and other creditors. My mother knew I lived a comfortable lifestyle and turned to me as a last resort, begging me to loan Melissa and Lucas money to pay off their debts. She asked for nearly $75,000. I questioned why Melissa hadn't asked me directly for help and why my mother was speaking for her. My mother explained that Melissa and Lucas didn't want her to approach me. They hadn't told me about their financial troubles because of our history from 5 years ago. Melissa wasn't ready to accept help from me, but my mother didn't know anyone else who could lend them such a large sum at short notice. A couple of months had passed, and Melissa and Lucas were struggling to make ends meet, even for basic necessities. My parents and Lucas's family were doing their best to support them, but their resources were limited. Both families were retired and needed to secure their own futures, so giving away their savings wasn't feasible. With no other options left, my mother called me to ask for help. I could afford to help them financially, but I didn't want to. Melissa was right not to ask me directly after what happened between us. They forfeited any right to expect anything from me when they betrayed me. I told my mother firmly that I couldn't and wouldn't help them. She sounded hurt and argued that I was being heartless and needed to think about our family. I replied that Melissa and Lucas didn't consider me when they had their affair, and my family didn't consider my feelings while supporting them. So I saw no reason to consider them now either. I had worked really hard to get where I am today, and I wasn't going to just give away $75,000 to people who didn't deserve it. Then, my mom called and started crying, saying she never thought I'd become so selfish. She said my sister and her husband would be in big trouble if I didn't help them. I told her I couldn't help, and I hung up. Since then, my mom has been texting me nonstop, begging me to change my mind and think about my sister. She said it wasn't the time for revenge and that my sister was in serious trouble. She thinks I'll regret not helping her in the future. It's really stressful, and I don't know what to do because I don't want to be seen as the bad person. Am I wrong for not helping my sister financially after she stole my fiancé 5 years ago? Update. So I finally decided to block my family. I didn't do it sooner because I wanted them to see how well I was doing and maybe feel envious. Also, I worried I might regret cutting them off if something bad happened to them. But now, I just don't care. I should have cut ties with them 5 years ago. I don't know why I kept them around for so long. That was my mistake. Refusing to help my sister now isn't about being petty. It just makes sense. They've already wasted a lot of money, and even if I gave them some now, they probably wouldn't be able to pay it back. $75,000 is a lot of money even for someone like me who's doing well financially. If I lend that much, I expect it back, even from close friends. But these people aren't close to me, and I can't count on them to repay me. So there's no reason for me to give them money. It's that simple. I talked to a few friends about it, and they agreed I made the right call. It's not about revenge, it's just not practical to help them after how they treated me in the past. Now that my mother can't contact me anymore, I don't have to worry about feeling guilty. Update 2. Hey everyone, something pretty intense happened today. I was at work when my neighbor called to say there was a couple outside my house causing a scene, yelling for me to come out and talk to them. She said they seemed unstable and had been there for an hour, refusing to leave. I asked for a description, and deep down, I knew it was Melissa and Lucas. My neighbor insisted I come home to handle the situation, and I agreed. With Melissa and Lucas, trouble always followed. I thanked her and rushed home to make sure they didn't get inside my house. I got home in about 15 minutes and caught them trying to break into my house by picking the lock. I parked in front of my place and asked them what they were doing. I tried to call the police, but Lucas knocked the phone out of my hand. Melissa then said they were only here to talk and didn't want anything from me, at least not right now. I told them to make it quick and insisted we stay outside in the yard. I didn't feel comfortable inviting them inside, especially since they seemed hostile despite claiming they didn't want anything from me. Melissa began speaking. She said my mother had told her about the phone call I ignored and how I had blocked them all. She accused me of being unfair and said it had been 5 years since the incident with my fiancé, so I should have moved on by now. She claimed I was acting dramatically to get attention from the family and felt insulted by my refusal to help them. That's why she wanted to talk to me. She explained that she had managed to gather the money this time by selling their house and jewelry, but she might need more in the future. Melissa said she needed assurance that I would be there to help again. I firmly told her no. I made it clear she couldn't rely on me because I deeply dislike her and her husband. I was so furious that I even mentioned how close I was to hitting her, so they should leave immediately. Then Lucas demanded that I sign a document promising to give them money whenever they asked. I couldn't believe it. I knew it wouldn't be legally binding if I signed it under duress. They were being unreasonable and seemed to think they could manipulate me into doing something like that. I ordered both of them to leave, but Melissa pushed me and insisted that I had to help them because we were family, and I couldn't avoid my responsibilities like this. I was shocked by her push, and I almost slapped her in response, but I managed to restrain myself because I knew it would only escalate things. Instead, I quickly grabbed my phone from the ground where Lucas had knocked it, and I ran to my car. I jumped in and drove off without even looking back. Since I had left the engine running earlier, I was able to speed away quickly. They didn't attempt to chase me on foot, so they stayed at my house, which was unfortunate for them. Once I was a safe distance away, I called the police and explained the situation. I hurried back home and arrived just in time for the police to show up. In less than 20 minutes, I gave them all the details, and they arrested Melissa and Lucas. I knew the charges might not be severe, but it was worth it to have them taken away and not have to deal with them anymore. It's been a few hours since then, and surprisingly, I haven't heard from anyone in my family. I thought someone might try to contact me from a different number by now, but they haven't. It makes me think they might be done with the situation and won't bother me again. Or maybe they're waiting for things to calm down before reaching out. Update 3. Hi, it's been about a week since my last update. I had started to think my family might leave me alone after I called the police on Melissa and Lucas. But I was wrong. They still found a way to bother me, and this time it was my parents who came to my house, asking if they could talk to me. This happened yesterday, and they seemed much more humble compared to Melissa and Lucas, so I allowed them in. My mother started crying as soon as she came in, apologizing for taking Melissa's side over mine in the past. My father said that after hearing about Melissa and Lucas getting arrested for their actions, including pushing me, they couldn't see them the same way anymore. They decided to cut them off. My mother continued crying throughout her visit while my father apologized for siding with Melissa instead of me in the past. I thanked them for finally realizing their mistake, but I explained that it was too late to repair our relationship. I've grown accustomed to living life on my own terms, and I'm not willing to prioritize my family over myself anymore. I appreciated their visit and apology, but I couldn't promise to work on our relationship. They tried to argue that we could fix things if we tried, but the truth was I no longer wanted to try. I just wanted to focus on myself. They seemed disappointed but eventually left, asking if I could at least unblock them so we could stay in touch. I've unblocked my parents now, which feels strange, but that's where things stand.
I had an idea about how sad and unlucky my sister is. I came up with the perfect plan. What kind of plan? Just watch and see. Mary put on a fancy dress, like one you'd wear to a wedding. She went to the microphone. When she got it, she turned to the guests and said confidently, "Does anyone want to marry my sister? She's not very smart and she's getting old, right?" After she said this, Mary looked at her sister with a mean smile. But she didn't realize how rude she was being. The mood in the room changed quickly. People started whispering, and some guests gave Mary angry looks. Mary didn't notice and grabbed the microphone again. "Come on, sister, you need to make yourself more appealing. There are lots of handsome doctors here. You really don't understand what you've done, do you?" Then something major and unexpected happened. "My name is Amy Schumer. I'm a 31-year-old woman with a regular job. There's nothing special about me except one thing. After middle school, I studied hard and became a lawyer. I have a sister named Mary who is 3 years younger than me. She's very charming and friendly, so our family always treated her specially. I'm not very noticeable, just plain and average. I'm not very charming, so my family and relatives didn't care about me much. I rarely felt any love and was often treated coldly at home. I couldn't compete with Mary's natural charm, and she got all of our parents' love. All I got were harsh looks. I worked very hard and got good grades, hoping to get some attention from my family. But I could never outshine Mary. Eventually, I got tired of trying to win my family's love and decided to focus on something else. I gave up on being loved and put all my energy into studying. I promised myself that I would find my worth through my knowledge. Studying hard gave me confidence, and my efforts led to good results. I hoped that my success in school would one day earn me some praise from my parents, holding on to this faint hope. I stayed up late every night studying throughout middle school. I was always at the top of my class and did better than other students in every test. But even then, my parents never praised me. Instead, they often criticized my grades. It's not just about being at the top. You need to get nearly perfect scores in every subject. Yes, even if you score 98% in science, it's not perfect. But this recent exam was really difficult. I would try to explain, but they called them excuses again. "Your lack of effort is why you get such results," my mother would say sharply. Her voice was as cold as ice. "Are you proud of those less than perfect grades?" All I could do was apologize. "Yes, I'm sorry," I murmured softly. No matter how much time and effort I put in, my results never matched my parents' idea of perfect. They never acknowledged my efforts. Any score less than 101% was just a reason for them to scold me. But more than my parents' coldness, my sister Mary's seemingly innocent words hurt more. "Oh, sister, are you getting lectured again?" She would come into my room without permission and smirk at my report card. "Good grades and still scolded? That's sad. I'd get praised for barely passing." "Did you come here just to say that?" I asked, feeling frustrated. "I was worried about you. Maybe you were feeling down again," Mary said, pretending to be concerned. But I didn't expect such a cold reception. "If you were really worried, you wouldn't talk to me like that," I replied, trying to stay calm. "See, that's your problem. You're always like this, so standoffish. That's why Mom and Dad don't show you love," Mary said, her gaze cold as ice. She looked down on me with clear contempt. For a brief moment, her attitude was obvious, even as she left the room. After she was gone, I could hear her cheerful laughter with our parents from the living room. I should have been used to it by now, but the sadness overwhelmed me, and tears streamed down my cheeks. I had told myself many times that I didn't need my parents' approval and that Mary's words wouldn't affect me. Yet my emotions betrayed me, and I cried. In my hand was the crumpled report card, wrinkled from my tight grip. Once again, I resolved to stand on my own and break free from this suffocating family environment. I knew that excelling in my studies and improving my skills was my way out. From that moment on, I threw myself into my studies with even more determination. One day, as a cool breeze swept through the classroom windows, my father made an unexpected announcement. "Amy, you won't be going to high school. You need to start looking for a job immediately," he said coldly. I was speechless, unable to hide my confusion. "Why would you say something like that?" I asked, my face blank with shock. "Further investing in you is unnecessary. If you want to go to high school, you'll have to pay for it with your own money. If that's not possible, then you'll have to give up," my father said coldly, dismissing my protests. "But I'm still in middle school. There aren't many jobs available for someone my age. How am I supposed to?" My words trailed off as my father ignored me. "You need to accept this. After discussing it with your mother, we've decided to focus our finances on Mary. We can't afford to spend more on you," he declared firmly. That's not fair, I thought bitterly, but my father's decision was final. His words hit me like a sudden storm, draining all color from the world around me. My mother and sister looked on with undisguised smiles, seemingly enjoying my despair. I understand better now. There were options like finding schools with tuition waivers or scholarships. But back then, without knowing how to access that information, I was devastated by the end of my educational path. Since that day, my love for learning quickly faded. Even the praise from my homeroom teacher, who always admired my grades, felt empty. The lack of support for education at home made my chances of going to college seem even more hopeless. Right after graduation, I started working at a local factory since I wasn't old enough to live on my own yet. I stayed with my family until I turned 19, working hard and contributing most of my salary to the household. I saved whatever little money I could for myself, enduring those tough days that felt like crawling through an endless tunnel. On my 19th birthday, I left home. I left a letter for my family and walked away from the place that now only held memories. Their reaction was as if I had never existed, complete silence, no phone calls or letters. Initially, living apart from my family was painful and loneliness shadowed my days. But with time, work kept me busy, easing the loneliness. Moving out and starting my own life relieved the stress I felt at home, bringing a mental clarity I hadn't known before. This newfound peace of mind revived my enthusiasm. I reignited my passion for learning and decided to start studying again from the basics, reviewing diligently. The joy of learning filled my heart once more. I moved on to high school textbooks and immersed myself in extensive reading. Along the way, I became captivated by books on law, sparking a deep interest in the legal profession. Despite only having a junior high education, I discovered the preliminary examination system that allowed me to pursue the bar exam. Armed with this knowledge, I intensified my dedication to studying, using every spare moment, even during short breaks at work. I memorized legal terms during lunch breaks, always preparing for the bar exam. My colleagues, who were mostly older than me, noticed my sincere efforts and supported me. At the age of 24, I successfully passed the bar exam. With this achievement, I left my long-term job at the factory and secured a position at a prestigious law firm. After 5 years of training, I ventured out on my own and established my own law practice. Now I happily serve as a legal consultant for a hospital. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I told my parents about becoming a lawyer. I think about their possible reactions and if I could finally meet their expectations. Yet deep down, I doubt I'll ever reach out to them. Unexpectedly, a reunion with my family came sooner than expected. One evening after work, I found a message on my phone from my younger sister, Mary. She was getting married. "Mary is getting married," I whispered to myself. My 29-year-old sister was engaged to a doctor, and their wedding was scheduled for next month. They wanted me to be there. Despite the long estrangement from Mary and my parents, I couldn't ignore such a significant event, so I replied that I would attend. Mary quickly responded with the date and location of the ceremony. Her message ended with, "Don't forget the wedding gift," which made me smile wryly. It seemed Mary was more focused on the gift than on welcoming me. I arrived at Mary's wedding hoping to reconnect with my family, if only briefly. I wore a carefully chosen blue dress and went through the entrance formalities before taking my seat in the family area, where my father and mother were already seated. "You have some nerve showing up here. You must be doing well for yourself with your paltry earnings from the factory," my father said coldly. "Indeed, it's embarrassing to have someone like her as family," my mother added with disdain. "Mary shouldn't have invited someone like you," my father continued. I told them the same, but they insisted on taking the celebration money anyway, my mother said quietly. They had this conversation as if I wasn't even there. This was the harsh reality I faced. I had hoped that sharing my side might bridge the gap between us, but that hope was quickly shattered. Both my father and mother seemed determined to avoid speaking to me at all. In the quiet of the venue, I looked around and spotted some familiar faces among the groom's side. Haven't I seen that person somewhere before? I wondered to myself, sensing a hint of déjà vu. As I tried to recall where I knew them from, I looked up the groom's name, and my suspicion turned into certainty. The connection I had suspected was now clear. I couldn't help but feel a faint surprise. It was such a coincidence, almost like fate unfolding. Despite this revelation, I decided to keep my emotions in check and quietly observe the day unfold. The ceremony proceeded beautifully, with the bride and groom making a grand entrance. Guests shared warm words and entertained, lightening the atmosphere. As time passed, the event shifted to dinner and then to photo sessions. Throughout it all, my parents got up without acknowledging me and moved toward the front where the bride and groom were waiting. Mary, drawn to them like a magnet, beamed happily in every photograph. Trying not to let the sight affect me, I quietly focused on the meal in front of me. Out of nowhere, my sister Mary came up to me. She approached with a smile, but her eyes held more than just happiness to see me after so many years. "Hey big sis, it's been ages, hasn't it? Are you glad we're spending time together like this?" she asked. I nodded quietly and replied, "Yes, the food at the party is really good." Mary smiled sarcastically, saying, "You don't get fancy food like this at the factory where you work, do you? You should appreciate being here." Her words stung deep inside, but I didn't let it show on my face. Mary's tone grew sharper, almost mocking. "Ah, did I hurt your feelings? I'm sorry, but isn't it natural for you to feel a bit jealous? After all, your little sister marrying a doctor and all," Mary said casually, as if the apology meant nothing. I kept my expression unchanged and quietly waited to see what she would do next. Then Mary whispered in my ear, "Big sis, because I pity you, I've come up with a great idea." Trying to remain calm, I asked suspiciously, "What idea?" Mary, looking pleased with herself, replied, "Just wait and see." In her beautiful wedding gown, Mary captured everyone's attention. She grabbed a microphone from a staff member and suddenly announced to the guests, "Ladies and gentlemen, some of you may not know my sister is here. She might not have the highest education or be the youngest, but if anyone is kind enough, could you please mentor her?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "What are you doing, Mary?" I exclaimed. Mary continued even louder, "Even though she doesn't make much money and lives a simple life, is there someone here who can help improve my sister's future?" All eyes were on me as Mary enjoyed my discomfort with a smug smile. Then, unexpectedly, our usually gentle parents joined in. "Please be kind to her," they added. I couldn't take it anymore. Anger boiled inside me. To be mocked like this at a joyful event, how far would they go? It was unbelievable, but now they would face the consequences. As the mood in the room shifted and whispers spread, Mary, oblivious to being the center of attention, cheerfully called out, "Amy, look, there are so many doctors here. This could be your chance." I remained silent, but my resolute stare spoke volumes. "Your games end here," I said firmly. Confused, Mary replied, "Huh?" I responded calmly, "You'll soon realize the gravity of what you've done." Just as Mary began to offer an excuse, the groom suddenly spoke up, "Please wait. Why is everyone getting up from their seats?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at the groom. His co-workers from the hospital were standing up, starting to leave. Despite his efforts to stop them, a dignified man who seemed to be the hospital director approached him with resolve. The recent comments made by the bride were so offensive that I'm shocked. "I apologize, but we can't stay here any longer. We're leaving," the hospital director stated firmly. The groom rushed to intervene, taking responsibility for Mary's words and actions. "Please wait. I acknowledge her words were out of line. I'll speak with her directly and make sure she understands." However, the hospital director underscored the seriousness of the situation and revealed something the groom wasn't aware of. "It's not just that. Do you not know who her sister is?" Confused, the groom admitted, "No, I only met her sister today. I heard she worked in a factory after middle school." Clearly irritated, the hospital director responded, "That's absurd. Her sister is a respected lawyer and serves as our hospital's legal advisor." The groom was taken aback by this revelation. He had no idea I held such a significant role. Mary and my parents were stunned as well. Unbeknownst to them, I was the legal advisor at the hospital where Mary's fiancé worked. Having seen him at hospital events before, the guests might have recognized me too. Mary's inappropriate remarks had exacerbated the situation, leaving the hospital director deeply offended. Although the groom had no personal connection to me, the hospital staff highly valued their legal advisor. The groom's face flushed red as he approached Mary, his voice rising. "What is going on? Your thoughtless words have damaged my reputation." Mary stuttered, trying to defend herself like a confused child. "I didn't mean it like that. I honestly didn't know my sister had such an important job. Furious, the groom continued to admonish Mary. Not knowing is no excuse. How could you speak so disrespectfully about your own sister? Your behavior is unacceptable. You've lost sight of what really matters. Mary, desperate to explain herself, pleaded, "Wait, please listen. There's a reason for all of this." But the groom, not willing to hear any more excuses, declared firmly, "The engagement is over. I don't want to hear your explanations. This is where our relationship ends." Shocked by his words, Mary collapsed where she stood, her face drained of color. In a burst of anger, the groom stormed out of the wedding hall, followed by the other guests. Just as I was about to leave, I heard my sister's desperate cry behind me. "Please, Amy, help me." Ignoring her plea, I turned back and faced her sternly. "Help you? Why should I? You brought this upon yourself with your own actions. Making fun of others and then trying to play the victim is disgraceful." Mary, clearly confused and anxious, pleaded, "Why are you being so harsh? If I had known you were successful as a lawyer." With a calm yet resolute demeanor, I replied, "Why should I have informed someone who never bothered to reach out to me about my career? Actually, I had already decided to sever ties after this wedding. Now, seeing how things turned out for you, I feel a sense of closure. You must be disappointed that your engagement to a doctor fell through. I suggest you work hard to find your next prospect." With those words, I left the venue gracefully. In the distance, I could hear the murmurs of disapproval from my parents and other guests. Everything unfolded as I had anticipated, and Mary's marriage was called off. My parents, who had pinned their hopes on Mary marrying a doctor for security, expressed their anger toward her for the first time. Overwhelmed by their disappointment, Mary sought solace with a broken heart, but I turned a deaf ear to her pleas. I ignored her calls and cut off all ties with the family. I later learned that Mary had quit her job and was now unemployed, estranged from our parents, and leading a reclusive life at home. As for me, I am content with both my professional and personal life, living peacefully without major issues. Although my relationship with my family has been strained, I am fortunate to have strong support from colleagues and friends in both my work and daily life. This positive environment is the result of years of hard work and dedication. While I faced challenges along the way, overcoming them has shaped who I am today. Reflecting on my past struggles, I now appreciate their significance. My goal is to continue living a fulfilling life at my own pace, setting achievable goals and keeping stress levels manageable. Mother-in-law, please don't take money from my wallet. My mother-in-law, who couldn't resist stealing, was trying to take money from my wallet again. When I told her to stop, she got angry. "Who do you think you are? You're just a daughter-in-law." Then she kicked me out of the house. She didn't realize she was making a big mistake. My name is Alina, and I'm 27 years old. I met Mike through a friend's introduction, and today we happily got married. When I was young, I lost my dad, and my mom raised me by herself. I respect and love her very much. However, when I first met my future mother-in-law, she said, "You look unlucky. That's why you lost your husband early." My mom and I were shocked by her rude comment about my late father. Both my father-in-law and Mike scolded her, but she defended herself, saying she was just being honest. My mom was worried about my marriage, but since my father-in-law and Mike were supportive, she eventually agreed to it. During the wedding, I was worried about what my mother-in-law might do. Thankfully, everything went smoothly. Just when I was starting to relax, there was a knock on the door of the dressing room. "Alina, it's your mom and Robert. Can we come in?" "Yes, please come in." It was my mom and her boyfriend Robert. They both shared their heartfelt congratulations and sat down. "That was a wonderful ceremony. Congratulations, Alina. You looked absolutely stunning." Robert was so moved that he cried the whole time. Well, seeing Robert's tear-streaked face, both my mom and I burst into laughter. In that cheerful atmosphere, Mike knocked and entered. "Alina, great job today." "Mom, Robert, thank you for being here." "Good job, Mike. Where are your parents?" My mom got tired and wanted to leave early, so I let her go. "I'm sorry." "It's fine. More importantly, keep your promise to me, okay?" "Of course." The agreement between my mom and Mike was that if my mother-in-law did anything to me while we were living together, Mike would always support and defend me. Because of my mother-in-law's insistence, I had to live with her after getting married. Initially, the plan was for Mike and me to live together, just the two of us. But my mother-in-law threw a fit, saying we couldn't get married unless we lived with her. Seeing my distress, my mom made this promise with Mike. Even my father-in-law said, "If something's up, let me know." Mike also told me that if living with his mom became truly unbearable, we could consider living separately. "Alina, if my mother does something, tell me right away, okay? Even if it seems small." "All right, I understand. Thanks. And I'm still working, so I'm not home that much. I think it'll be okay." "You're being naive, Alina. Well, this is something you'll only understand once you experience it. Take care of my daughter, Mike." "Yes, ma'am." I soon learned that my mom was right. After returning from our honeymoon and living in Mike's family home, I immediately saw my mother-in-law's true colors. This food looks terrible. Redo it. Without even tasting the meal I had just prepared, my mother-in-law dumped it straight into the trash. Seeing this, both my father-in-law and Mike immediately scolded her, but she retorted, "I can't let you two eat such terrible-looking food. I threw it out for your sake and yet, never mind." Then she stormed off to her room. Apologizing, Mike and his dad decided to take us out for dinner. When my mother-in-law heard this, she threw a tantrum about not being invited, but Mike and his father just ignored her. This made her even angrier, and she started harassing me more. Mike's family runs a small workshop, and Mike is busy preparing to take over. He studies hard, attends meetings with his father, and networks a lot. I have my job during the weekdays and am hardly home, but the weekends were a nightmare. My mother-in-law mostly stays home, does no housework, and either lounges around watching TV or goes out. Mike tries to help out when he can, and after the food incident, my father-in-law told me, "I can manage on my own. Just prepare food for Mike." When my mother-in-law found out about this, she said, "As a daughter-in-law, it's only natural that you should prepare food for the whole family." But my father-in-law dismissed her. Adding to the mix, my mother-in-law has very old-fashioned views. "Elena, when are you going to quit your job? When are you having kids? A woman can achieve anything with ability and charm, you know. Don't you understand? Oh, maybe you lack those, so you're still working." From her comments, it's clear my mother-in-law doesn't work and is a housewife. But according to Mike, she struggles with household chores. She's technically listed as an employee at my father-in-law's company, but she doesn't actively work. Instead, she receives a salary as pocket money from my father-in-law. However, whenever she likes something, she buys it right away, so my father-in-law handles the finances. Mike never lends her money, so when she's short on cash, she asks me, "Elena, can you lend me some money?" I'm sorry, but Mike told me not to lend you any money. After enduring her mistreatment, I couldn't understand why she expected me to lend her money willingly. Even after I refused, she persisted. "I'll make sure Mike and your dad don't find out, okay?" "I can't, sorry." "Please, Elena." "I'm sorry." My mother-in-law tried to smile and pleaded with me, but when I continued to refuse, she erupted in her usual temper tantrum. "Why are you being so difficult? You're really stingy for not helping me, even though I'm asking nicely. I can't believe it. That's why I treat you badly." Does she even realize she's the one being mean? It's surprising that someone as kind-hearted as Mike could have a mother with such a personality. Just when I was mentally trying to escape from her drama, she stormed off somewhere, clearly irritated. When Mike came home and I told him about his mother pestering me for money, both he and my father-in-law scolded her. Instead of feeling sorry, my MIL glared at me and accused, "You tattled." She then sneakily tried to rummage through my purse and take cash from my wallet. While I was out of the room, we made eye contact as I walked back in. "MIL, don't you dare take money from my wallet. I can't believe this." I warned her, but she snapped back at me. "Who do you think you are? You're just a daughter-in-law. It's like stealing from someone else's wallet. How dare you speak up to me? Unbelievable. If you're going to be like this, just leave this house." I had reached my limit with my selfish NIL. Honestly, getting away from her unreasonable behavior would be a relief. I told her, "Fine," and started packing my things. She watched me with a smug grin, seemingly satisfied. "Thanks for everything." It had only been 3 months since I moved in with my in-laws, but I vowed never to live with my NIL again and went back home in anger. I was so upset that I forgot to tell Mike. However, when he returned home, he found out from his father about what had happened with his mother. "Where's Elena? Hey, where did Elena go?" When Mike and his father returned home from work and noticed I was gone, they asked my MIL about it. She proudly said, "Oh, I just kicked that useless daughter-in-law out." She laughed loudly, but both Mike and his father looked worried and uneasy. Seeing their serious reaction, she continued obliviously, "This is what I've been saying. I warn you not to marry a woman from a single-parent family. She's always disobedient and challenges me." All she had to do was agree with whatever I said. "What have you done?" My father-in-law shouted, more agitated than I had ever seen him. My NIL looked shocked, clearly not expecting such a reaction. Father-in-law collapsed to his knees, looking devastated, muttering, "It's over, my life is over." "What's wrong?" My MIL seemed bewildered, struggling to grasp what was happening. "You've done something unthinkable. Why did you kick her out?" Father-in-law's voice trembled with emotion. "Elena is the stepdaughter of the CEO of the company we do business with." "What?" It finally dawned on my MIL what she had done. Her face went pale for a moment, but she quickly composed herself, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong. "Mike, call Elena right now." I did. She's at Robert's place now. "This is serious. Let's go immediately." I got a call on my cell from Mike. telling me that his father-in-law was possibly putting his mother-in-law into the car and heading our way. From the background noise, I could hear my MIL shouting frantically and my father-in-law yelling, "Robert, you came to the wedding with my mother as her new husband." Even though he's technically my stepfather, it turns out Robert is actually the boss of my father-in-law's business client. My mother had always said she wouldn't remarry until after I got married, so she hadn't met our families until the wedding and wasn't seated in the family section at the ceremony. So my mother-in-law doesn't know about this. My father-in-law only recently found out that Robert was my mother's new husband. Robert married my mother after I got married, but I've known Robert for nearly 20 years. After my father passed away, my mother raised me on her own. No matter how tough things got, she never complained and was always smiling, brightening up everyone around her. Robert, smitten by her, proposed to her, but she apparently told him she wouldn't marry anyone until after I was married. I don't want to burden Elena anymore, getting a new dad, changing her last name, moving. I can't make her go through all of that just because of adult circumstances. I'm so sorry. I'll wait. Huh? I'll wait until Elena grows up, becomes independent, and someday gets married and is happy. Then it'll be my turn to make you happy. Robert, can I stay and watch over Elena with you until then? By then, won't we be pretty old? It doesn't matter. If we're talking age, I'll be even older. Robert laughed heartily, my mother with tears in her eyes, thanking him. Robert respected my mother's wishes, always promising to wait. They never officially married until I did, but I knew they deeply loved each other, even after losing my father. Sometimes I felt like if my mother married Robert, she would be taken away from me. There were times I wasn't kind to Robert, but he always treated me lovingly, often taking us out or going on trips. He even tried to pay for my college tuition. My mother declined, saying it was a matter of principle, but that's the kind of relationship we had with Robert. Of course, my childhood home now belonged to Robert, so as my MIL suggested, we returned there. When we filled Robert in on everything that happened with my in-laws and about my MIL, he was furious. Knowing the business relationship with my father-in-law's company, he was boiling with anger when the doorbell rang. My mother checked the monitor and saw my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and Mike outside. She asked Robert if they could come in, and he agreed, unlocking the door to welcome them. As soon as they entered and saw the tense atmosphere, both my father-in-law and Mike knelt down. "We're deeply sorry. My wife was very rude to Elena. It seems she forced Elena to leave," my father-in-law apologized. "I'm sorry too. If Elena is uncomfortable, we can stop living together," Mike added. While they were apologizing, my MIL stood defiantly with her arms crossed. "What are you talking about? Elena is the one at fault here, right? I did nothing wrong. Besides, who will do the housework now that Elena is gone?" I was stunned, unable to close my open mouth. Looking at my indifferent MIL, I knew she lacked common sense, but I never expected her behavior to escalate like this. It was my father-in-law who finally broke the silence. "I knew you were sheltered and naive, but I never imagined you'd go this far," he said with resignation. "We'll start the divorce proceedings as soon as tomorrow. I'm utterly disappointed in you." "What are you talking about? Why should I be the one to get a divorce? If anyone should, it should be Elena and Mike, since she left on her own." My MIL's earlier arrogance vanished when faced with the prospect of divorce from her husband. Mike joined in the confrontation. "Why should I divorce Elena? I love her. I have no intention of divorcing her. We only agreed to live with you because you begged us, crying, and yet you treat Elena like a maid. Stop talking nonsense." My father-in-law nodded in agreement and said, a mix of exasperation and anger evident in his voice, "Your father asked me to take care of you, so I became your husband and took care of you. But no matter how many times I warn you, you never listen and you never show any remorse. At this age, you're beyond my control." My mother-in-law clung to my father-in-law, who appeared distant, perhaps reflecting on the challenges he had faced until now. "What about the company? It belonged to my father. Your father passed the company to me when he passed away. Even if I retire, Mike is here. You've only been a figurehead at the company and haven't done any real work. Do you think you can suddenly take over? I won't let the employees end up on the streets because of you." My MIL appeared to be searching for a way out as she faced criticism from her husband and Mike. Just to clarify, my MIL is a true daddy's girl, raised in luxury. She's never held a job, always living as a pampered princess. Without her husband's support, she wouldn't be able to manage household chores, let alone a job. My MIL tried to hold on to my father-in-law, but his decision seemed firm. "Elena, say something." Out of desperation, she turned to me for support. "I also believe divorce is the right decision. Someone who tries to steal money from another's wallet and then reacts aggressively when confronted, who knows what she might do next?" "What are you talking about?" To those who might not know the real reason I left, I explained that it was because my MIL had attempted to steal money. Their faces turned pale. "I can't believe this. This is unbelievable." Stop exaggerating. I was just borrowing a little, Mil retorted unapologetically. Both my mother and Robert countered firmly. In most places that's called theft, which is a serious crime. I thought you were unreasonable, but I cannot allow my daughter to return to a place where someone like you lives. I agree. Elena may not be my biological daughter, but she is precious to me. How can I send back such a beloved daughter to someone who mistreats her? Robert added. I have no response to that. We are truly sorry. Throughout this conversation, both my father-in-law and Mike have been apologizing repeatedly, but Mil hasn't apologized once. You're the reason for all this, aren't you? How can you behave like this? Despite their apologies, Mil showed no remorse. Well, that's because, look, I've encountered a few people like you in my time, so I can pretty much guess. If I were you, I'd consider a divorce. Don't make decisions for me. You're the one being unreasonable here. Enough is enough. I'm telling you I will go to court if necessary, but I'm divorcing you. That's final. No, please. My father-in-law had indeed prepared divorce papers with his part filled out. He was ready to take legal action if Mil resisted. Finally grasping the seriousness of the situation, Mil reluctantly signed the divorce papers and relinquished half of the assets. My father-in-law seemed strangely relieved. Mike kept his promise to my mom and severed ties with Mil. Even my father-in-law distanced himself from her. After the divorce, Mil couldn't curb her shopping habits and quickly spent through her share of the assets. Despite trying to reach out to them multiple times, both were steadfast in blocking her out completely. Recently, I happened to see someone who resembled Mil. She had aged considerably, losing her once proud and arrogant demeanor, looking frail and fragile. Her whole presence had changed. Due to her behavior, she had always been kept at a distance. Now, after everything that happened, negative rumors about her were spreading like wildfire. It seemed no one was willing to help her anymore. It's said that she's finally feeling remorse for her actions. As they say, actions have consequences. A few days later, my father-in-law and Mike visited Robert with a box of chocolates to apologize. When I explained that Mil had disappeared, Robert and my mother cautioned them not to let it happen again. Afterward, I returned to Mike's family home. Since Mil left, my stress levels have dropped significantly. Not just me, but both my father-in-law and Mike also seemed to be much happier. Soon after, I found out I was pregnant, and the whole family was overjoyed. We are eagerly awaiting the arrival of our new family member.
You're not needed anymore, so please go. Why would you say that after everything we've been through? This house is enough. I'm going to live here with my daughter and the others. I worked hard for 15 years to save up and buy this place. I chose a big condo so we could all live together because she wanted to move in. But then my husband stepped in. Why are you surprised? Your job here is done. Thanks for everything up to now. Are you serious? I looked straight at my husband, trying hard to stay calm despite my mixed feelings. Of course, if you don't want to leave, we can get a divorce. Do it quickly. Hearing this, I made up my mind. My husband is unemployed and doesn't understand what would happen if we divorced now. I realized he was a disappointment and I wanted to leave as soon as possible. Understood. If that's how it is, I'll leave. Leave right now, okay? I'd be so happy not to see your face again. They both gave me the ugliest smiles I had ever seen. There was no need to hold back against a husband and mother-in-law like this. I wanted them to feel the consequences immediately, so I sold the high-rise condo right away. My name is Sandra, and I turned 39 this year. I've been married to Robert for 4 years. We used to work at the same company, but we weren't that close. Then 4 years ago, something changed. Huh? Sandra? Robert, is that you? Long time no see. What are you doing here? Actually, I quit my job today. What? Why? I quit because it was finally time to chase a dream I've always had. You know I've been drawing cartoons for a while, right? I finally made my debut. Seriously? That's amazing. Show me sometime. Back then, I didn't have any special feelings for him, but I was happy he praised me. Later, I found out that after quitting the company, Robert started his own business. The last time we saw each other was in our 20s, and at that time, things were going well for me at work. If you're okay with it, why don't we date? That's sudden, isn't it? I think we're really compatible. Robert's confession surprised me, but it didn't feel bad. I was about to turn 35 and thinking about marriage too. But I'm at the age where I want to get married. Then let's get married. What, really? I was overwhelmed by how quickly things were moving. Is that a no? Thank you. Yes. Before I knew it, I had accepted his proposal. I went ahead with it on impulse, and though I was full of anxieties, they proved to be unfounded. You've worked hard here. Want some coffee? Thanks. Another all-nighter? Yeah, the deadline is close. Don't push yourself too hard. Both my marriage and job were going well. In fact, things were so good that I wondered if it was okay for them to be this perfect. Robert understood my work and even took care of household chores when I was busy. There was just one thing that bothered me. By the way, how's work lately? Huh? Oh, it's fine. I've had some free time recently. Why? You've been coming home early and doing all the housework. I'm just doing it because I like to. Don't worry about it, okay? We used to talk about work a lot, but for the last few weeks, he hadn't mentioned anything about his job. I believed him when he said everything was okay and didn't ask more questions. Looking back, that might have been a mistake. Before I knew it, nearly 4 years had passed. My job was going well, and there was even talk of turning my work into comics and animations. Then, I started wanting to have our own home. I've been thinking about getting our own place. What do you think? A house? That sounds great. Oh, but is something wrong? Robert looked down with a regretful expression. I prepared myself, sensing something unpleasant was coming. I know this is sudden, but is there any way my mom could live with us? What? Your mother? She's alone now, and I'm a bit worried about her. Since losing my father-in-law 2 years ago, my mother-in-law seemed to have lost her spirit. It felt like there was a big hole in her heart. I was indeed worried about leaving her alone from now on. Okay, but it will take time to build a house. Maybe a condo would be better. Thank you. Just agreeing to live with her is enough for me. You can decide the rest. Then that's what we'll do. So in between work, I visited various condos since we were going to live together. I wanted something spacious and comfortable. I had savings from 15 years of frugal living. A month after starting the search for a condo, I signed the contract. Today, really? What kind is it? This one. I showed my husband the brochure for the condo I had chosen. I was confident he would be pleased. Is this a high-rise luxury condo? Yes, it is. I thought we might as well. He probably didn't expect me to choose a high-rise. Although surprised, his eyes sparkled like a child who had just received a new toy. Mom will definitely be happy with this. I hope so. With this, a new life, including my mother-in-law, was about to begin, filled with a little anxiety and great anticipation. However, I would soon realize that it was a mistake as soon as we started living with her. Sandra, thanks for letting me stay here. This place is amazing. Oh, it's no big deal. I just did what anyone would do. Everything was fine for a while, but 3 months later, my mother-in-law's behavior suddenly changed a lot. Sorry, could you clean my room? My back hurts. I'm sorry, Mom, I have to work now. Then my mother-in-law said something completely different from her usual kindness. Work? You just stay in your room all day while Robert does all the housework, don't you? Robert and I decided that together. No more excuses. Just do it now, please. I didn't understand why she was acting so differently. All I knew then was that not doing what she asked would only cause more problems, so I cleaned the room thoroughly as she wanted. I'll be in the living room. Let me know when you're done. She didn't help at all and just relaxed in comfort. Why did I have to do this? I felt frustrated. I'm finished. At last, can't you clean a bit faster? I'm sorry. Well, okay then. Please make sure to do it regularly from now on. In the end, my mother-in-law went back to her room without thanking me. I was angry at her demanding attitude, but I kept quiet, fearing more complaints if I resisted. I told my husband about it. My mom? Why would she do that? I'll talk to her. Really? I find it hard to talk back to her. Don't worry, I'll handle it. His reassurance made me feel better. True enough, from the next day onwards, my mother-in-law stopped being so harsh with me. I thought I could now concentrate on work as usual until a week later when I returned home from a meeting. I'm back. When I walked in, I noticed unfamiliar shoes by the door. As I approached the living room, I overheard voices. Hey, where's Sandra today? Oh, she's at a meeting. It's amazing though. She's become a successful cartoon artist at her age. Yeah, it's impressive. Why do you sound so proud? It was Robert's sister, Christina, who was visiting. Just as I was about to enter the room, I heard more of their conversation. By the way, Mom, you've been quieter lately. Oh yes, it's more amusing to knock her down when she feels secure, isn't it? And Robert, you agree, right? Well, if she can't work anymore, it would be a problem, right? Sandra is the one bringing in money for us after all. Oh, right. I stood there, stunned not only by what was said, but by the realization that my husband and mother-in-law were plotting something together. From then on, life became unbearable. Did you discuss that thing? About work? I didn't think it needed to be brought up. You always do this. What? What are you talking about? Christina asked innocently, clearly unaware of the conversation's subject. I was also clueless and eager to hear Robert's explanation. Well, it couldn't be helped. Actually, the company I was running went bankrupt shortly after we got married. What? You never mentioned that. That's terrible, Christina exclaimed. I've been through a lot, but I was lucky. I never expected that when I suggested living with Mom, Sandra would opt for such an upscale condo. When Robert admitted this to me, instead of surprise, I felt a surge of anger because I realized I had been deceived. Knowing he had hidden this and acted normal made me feel sick to my stomach. At that moment, I regretted everything deeply. If only I hadn't ignored the signs of change in my husband. But I couldn't dwell on regrets forever, and I started considering when to leave. Maybe it's time, Robert remarked. Time for what? Christina asked. Well, that's for another time, Robert replied casually. Unable to listen any longer, I burst through the door. They were shocked, clearly not expecting me to return. What's going on? I demanded. Seeing my husband and mother-in-law flustered, I almost laughed but held it back. You startled me. If you were back, you should have said something, Robert stammered. I did say I'm home, but maybe you were too caught up in your conversation. I retorted. Well, never mind. Sandra, come sit here. Let's have some coffee together. Yes, thank you, I replied politely, then engaged in meaningless conversation. It felt like it had been ages since I'd endured such dullness. After about an hour, Christina announced she was leaving. I should head home now. You could stay a bit longer. I'd like to, but I have plans after this. Well, if that's the case, I understand. Let me walk you out part of the way. Christina probably sensed my feelings towards Robert and his mother. Maybe that's why she wanted to get away from the situation. As Christina was leaving, I stopped her. Thanks for coming today. Did you have a good time? Yes, Christina replied nervously, as if fearing criticism. Seeing her uneasy expression, I decided it was best to give her a heads up. I wanted to tell you something, Christina. You shouldn't trust them too much. What do you mean? About what we talked about earlier? Christina's expression turned pale as she seemed to grasp that my husband and mother-in-law were the ones I was warning her about. I understand. See you around. From then on, as far as I know, Christina never visited us again. My mind was consumed with thoughts of how to exact revenge on them. One day, as part of my routine, I checked the mailbox and found a letter addressed to Robert. The moment I saw it, I couldn't help but laugh, thinking it might be useful. I'm heading to work. Have a good day. How insincere. Curious about where he was really going, I decided to follow him. I had observed as he idled in a park for a while before heading to a casino. I took photos to have evidence for later use. He was unemployed and yet engaged in activities like this. Who made this awful meal? My mother-in-law's criticism had started again, likely sparked by our earlier conversation. I had been pondering ways to retaliate against her. I made it. Since Robert doesn't cook and no one else could have, it had to be me. How dare you serve something like this? You didn't put poison in it, did you? Clean this up. Her words were harsh, almost refreshing. I was angry, but that wasn't my main concern. Unable to come up with a plan on my own, I decided to call my mother. I was nervous about her reaction, but getting back at my husband and mother-in-law was more important. Hello, Mom. You sound upset. What's wrong? Actually, I proceeded to tell my mother everything that had been happening. I had expected her to be critical, but instead she was sympathetic. So that's what's been going on. You've been through a lot. Her words brought tears to my eyes. But what should I do now? From what you've told me, the condo is in your name, right? Yes, but... And it seems they both like living there. Why not just sell it? Sell it? The idea hadn't occurred to me. My mother's suggestion struck a chord. I started imagining how my husband and mother-in-law would react to losing their home. Life would certainly become challenging for my unemployed husband and mother-in-law. It's actually a good idea, isn't it? It sure is, but it's amazing how you can say that with a laugh. Well, it's your decision, Sandra. Just know that we're here for you. Yeah, hearing you say that gives me more strength. Feel free to reach out anytime. I couldn't stop thinking about my mother's advice. One evening after dinner and cleaning up, Robert said he needed to talk. Following his instructions, I sat down on the sofa where both Robert and my mother-in-law were smirking. I had a sinking feeling about this. So what's this talk about? I asked cautiously. My mother-in-law began. You're no longer needed here, so please leave. Why would you say that after everything? This house is. She interrupted me sharply, ignoring my frustration. Enough. I'm going to live here with Christina and the others. Why with Christina and the others? I asked, recalling the conversation they had at home that day. It seemed this was the fun they had planned. Robert then added, why the surprised look? Your role here is finished. Thanks for everything up to now. Are you serious? I stared directly at him, my emotions overwhelming me. Fine, if you want me to leave, we can get divorced. Let's get it over with. Upon hearing my words, I made my decision. Robert, being unemployed, seemed oblivious to the consequences of divorce. What a disappointment. I wanted to leave that place as soon as possible, and I had prepared for this moment. Fine, if that's how it is, I'll leave. Leave right now. Fine. I'd be thrilled not to see your face again, Robert sneered. They both wore the most sinister smiles I had ever seen. There was no reason to hold back anymore against such a husband and mother-in-law. I wanted to make them feel the consequences right away. Packing only the essentials, I walked out of the house. They watched me leave, but I felt no sadness or regret. Since we're getting divorced anyway, you handle the divorce papers. I'm not worried about this condo. You can take care of it, I said calmly. Without waiting for their response, I walked away without looking back. They could say whatever they wanted. For now, I decided to return to my parents' home. I'm on my way home. So, you've made your decision? Yes, I might be a bit of a burden for a while. Your father and I are here for you. Take your time coming back. At home, my parents welcomed me with unchanged warmth. Seeing their faces, I felt a profound sense of relief. Welcome back. I'm home. It's been a while since you've been here. Take it easy today. Thank you. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in a long while. The next day, I wasted no time. I prepared the divorce papers and headed straight to the real estate agent. It was better to sell the condo than to leave it for my husband and mother-in-law, who had no income and would struggle without a home. This condo is in demand. We should find a buyer quickly. That's good to hear. Please take care of it. Consider it done. A month later, the real estate agent informed me that a buyer was interested in the condo. My ex-husband and mother-in-law were still living there, and during that month, I had successfully finalized the divorce. They were now strangers to me, and I eagerly anticipated meeting these two oblivious individuals. The potential buyer wants to view the property soon. Got it. Can I be there for the showing? That would be very helpful. Please join us. The day of the showing finally arrived. As I opened the front door, Robert burst out. Hey, who let you in? Who are you people? Apparently he hadn't noticed me, so I stepped forward. Long time no see. Huh? Why are you here? Funny you should ask. After all, this condo is in my name. What? It seemed he hadn't understood the situation yet. Don't you get it? It means this place isn't yours to claim. That can't be true, he stammered. Then my mother-in-law appeared, which I thought was perfect timing. I decided to confront both of them right then and there. Hey, what are you doing causing a scene in someone's home? Don't just barge in here. I could call the police on you. That should be my line. You two have no right to live here. Talking nonsense won't help you. This place belongs to us. I sighed at their stubbornness. Could you please leave this house immediately? You're disrupting the viewing. Viewing? Why would there be a viewing? Because I've put this condo up for sale. Like I said, I bought this place, so I own it. Robert seemed too furious to comprehend. Even if what you're saying is true, where are we supposed to live? Why don't you go back to your parents' house? We tore down that old house. Oh, that's unfortunate. Stop joking. Robert tried to grab me. Fortunately, I dodged quickly, and he stumbled and fell dramatically. Everyone except my mother-in-law burst into laughter at his fall. If you don't want me to call the police for trespassing, please leave. You're in the way. I looked down at him as I spoke. When I saw his face, he looked like he was on the verge of tears, finally understanding the situation. He then knelt down and begged, but nothing he could do would change my mind. We were wrong. Please forgive us. Mom apologized to her too. Why should I? Apologizing won't change anything now. Can you just disappear from my sight? I won't ask again. With that, Robert, dragging his mother by the hand, fled like a defeated animal. Watching them leave like that brought an unexpected sense of relief. The viewing proceeded smoothly and the sale was finalized. I informed them both they needed to remove any remaining belongings from the condo. That was my final act of leniency. Later, I received a call from Christina. What's going on, Christina? It's about my mom and what happened. Curious about their situation, since I hadn't kept track of them, I listened attentively. It seems they're living in a tiny one-room apartment now. See, I warned you not to trust them. I've definitely learned that lesson from this experience. It turned out Christina had taken my advice and refused any further involvement with them, which is why she wasn't present during the viewing. From now on, it's best to keep your distance from them, I advised. Yes, Christina agreed, determined to avoid any more entanglements with those two. However, not long after, Robert reached out to me again. Can you lend me some money? Just a little. That's your own fault for gambling and accumulating debt. I found debt collection letters addressed to you by chance. And I also had someone follow you when you lied about having a job and went out. I'm working seriously now, but I still have debts, and it's hard to make ends meet. That's not my problem. Oh, and could you pass a message to your mother? Tell her she got what she deserved. I hung up immediately, realizing they would likely face more difficult times ahead. Reflecting on these events, I considered turning this experience into a comic for my next project. It could make for an intriguing story. The crystal stemware clinked as Eleanor Matthews raised her glass, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping it just a bit too tightly. The candlelight caught the enormous diamonds on her hand. A reminder, as if anyone needed one, of the Matthews family's wealth and status. To my son, she declared, her voice carrying across the private dining room at Le Cirque, who carries forward our family's proud legacy, her eyes fixed on me, sharp as daggers. Despite certain complications, my name is Sarah Matthews, though according to my mother-in-law, I'll never truly be a Matthews. After 5 years of marriage to her son James, I'm still the secretary who got lucky. If only she knew that while she was planning this elaborate anniversary dinner to remind me of my place, I had been in my office, closing a deal that would save the very legacy she was so proud of. Mother, James said, a warning note in his voice. Not tonight. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't be so sensitive, darling. We're all family here. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, though some of us understand the weight of that name better than others. I took a sip of my wine, letting the expensive vintage roll across my tongue. 5 years ago, her words would have cut deep. Now they just made me think of the signed contract sitting in my office safe, and the look that would be on her face tomorrow at the board meeting. How is the company doing, James? Eleanor turned to her son. Your father would be so proud to see you at the helm of Matthews Industries. I watched my husband's face carefully. James was handsome, successful, and completely unaware that his company was on the brink of collapse, or that I had spent the last 6 months secretly working to save it. Everything's fine, Mother, he replied, but I could see the tension in his jaw. James was a brilliant engineer, but he'd never had his father's head for business. The company had been bleeding money for years, and he'd been too proud to admit it. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Of course it is. Matthew's men always succeed. She turned her attention back to me. Though I suppose that's hard for some people to understand. Not everyone grows up with business in their blood. Eleanor, my father-in-law's brother, Uncle Robert, cut in. Perhaps we could discuss something else. But Eleanor was on a roll now, fortified by several glasses of expensive wine. I'm simply saying that some people might find it difficult to appreciate the pressures of running a family company, especially when their previous experience was mainly answering phones and getting coffee. The table fell silent. I could feel everyone's discomfort. The Matthews family had never quite known how to handle Eleanor's thinly veiled disdain for her son's choice of wife. What none of them knew, what even James didn't know, was that I hadn't just been a secretary at Matthews Industries. I had been working on my MBA at night, studying the company's operations, seeing problems that everyone else seemed to miss. By the time I married James, I understood Matthews Industries better than most of its executives. And for the past 6 months, I had been secretly working to save it from bankruptcy. It started when I accidentally discovered some concerning financial reports in James's home office. The company was hemorrhaging money, losing contracts, and falling behind competitors. James was drowning, but his pride and his mother's expectations kept him from admitting it. Instead of confronting him, I began working behind the scenes. My old network from my secretary days proved invaluable: assistants and receptionists who knew everything that happened in their offices, who were happy to help the former one of them who had married the boss. Through them, I learned about a potential deal with Suntech, a rising star in the tech industry. They needed a manufacturing partner for their new line of products, and Matthews Industries had the facilities they needed. The problem was, no one at Matthews had taken their overtures seriously. Suntech was too new, too different from our traditional clients. But I saw the potential. Using my connections and working through intermediaries, I spent months nurturing the relationship, structuring a deal that would not only save Matthews Industries, but transform it for the modern era. This morning, I had finally closed the deal, $50 million upfront, with the potential for billions in ongoing contracts. Tomorrow at the board meeting, when Suntech's CEO announced the partnership, everything would change. Sarah? James's voice pulled me back to the present. You're very quiet tonight. I smiled at my husband, reaching for his hand under the table. Just thinking about tomorrow's board meeting. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Oh, do you attend those now? How progressive of you, James. Sarah's insight is valuable, James defended, though I could hear the slight uncertainty in his voice. Even after 5 years, his mother's disapproval could still shake his confidence. I'm sure it is, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. Tell me, Sarah, what insights could you possibly offer about running a company that's been in our family for 3 generations? I met her gaze steadily. Sometimes a fresh perspective is exactly what a company needs, Eleanor. She laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Fresh perspective? My dear, you wouldn't know the first thing about running a business of this magnitude. This isn't like organizing the office Christmas party. I felt James tense beside me, but I squeezed his hand, silently asking him to let it go. Tomorrow would bring enough drama without adding to it tonight. Perhaps you're right, I said smoothly, raising my glass. To the Matthews legacy. Eleanor smiled triumphantly, clearly taking my response as submission. As she noticed the slight curve of my lips, the quiet confidence in my eyes, she dismissed it as the wishful thinking of a social climber who had married above her station. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of subtle jabs and backhanded compliments. Eleanor held court, reminiscing about the glory days of Matthews Industries, when her husband William had turned it into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country. Your father had such vision, she told James. He could spot an opportunity a mile away. That's the Matthews instinct, something that can't be learned in some community college course. Another pointed look in my direction. I thought about the contracts in my office, about the months of careful negotiation, about the future I had secured for the company while they were all clinging to the past. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. After dinner, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, James pulled me close. I'm sorry about Mother, he said softly. You know how she gets. It's fine, I assured him, straightening his tie. Nothing she says matters. He studied my face. You seem different lately. More confident, like you know something the rest of us don't. I smiled, thinking of the board meeting tomorrow. Maybe I do. Care to share? All in good time, I said, kissing him lightly. Just promise me you'll be at the board meeting tomorrow. Don't let anything keep you away. He looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. Though I don't know why it's so important, it's just another quarterly review. If he noticed my slight smile, he didn't mention it. That night, as James slept beside me, I stayed awake, reviewing the events that had led to this moment. I thought about my first day at Matthews Industries, a fresh-faced secretary with an MBA dream. How Eleanor had walked past my desk every morning without so much as a glance in my direction. How James had been different, actually seeing me, appreciating my insights, falling in love with me despite his mother's opposition. I thought about the day I discovered how bad things really were at the company. The shock of seeing the true financial statements, The realization that the company's proud legacy was about to come crashing down. The decision to act, to save not just the company but my husband from the weight of failure. Tomorrow would change everything. The question was, would they be ready for it? My phone buzzed softly. A text from Angela, Suntech's CEO. Everything set for tomorrow. Can't wait to see their faces. I smiled in the darkness. Angela had become more than just a business partner over the months of negotiation. She understood what it was like to be underestimated, to have to prove yourself in a world that had already decided what you were worth. Get ready for a show, I texted back. The Matthews Industries boardroom was impressive by design. 40 stories up, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was meant to intimidate. The massive mahogany table, the leather chairs, the portraits of past CEOs lining the walls. Everything screamed old money, established power. I arrived early, watching the morning sun paint the city gold. The contracts were safely stored in my briefcase, along with a presentation that would change everything. James had already left for his usual morning meetings, completely unaware of what was coming. Eleanor arrived exactly 10 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, wearing her trademark channel suit and an expression of barely concealed disdain when she saw me. "Sarah, don't tell me you're actually staying for the board meeting." She made it sound like I was planning to crash a private club. "Of course," I replied calmly. "I wouldn't miss it." She sighed dramatically. "Really, James needs to set better boundaries. These meetings are for actual board members and executives, not—" She waved her hand dismissively, "family observers." Before I could respond, the other board members began filing in. I recognized them all. The old guard who had run Matthews Industries with William, who still saw me as the secretary who had somehow snared the boss's son. James arrived last, looking slightly harried. "Sorry, got caught up in the R&D meeting. What's on the agenda for today?" Theodore Wells, the CFO, cleared his throat. "Actually, we have some concerning matters to discuss regarding the company's financial position." Before we get to that, I interrupted smoothly, standing up. "There's something else that needs to be addressed." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Sarah, dear, this really isn't the time for whatever this is." "Actually, Eleanor, this is exactly the time." I moved to the front of the room, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the display screen. "You see, I've been working on something for the past 6 months. Something that's going to change everything for Matthews Industries." The room fell silent as I pulled up the first slide. Charts showing the company's declining revenues, lost contracts, mounting debts, everything they have been trying to hide. "What is this?" James asked, his voice tight. "Sarah, how did you get these numbers?" I finished for him. "I've always had access to them, James. I've been watching our company slowly die while everyone in this room pretended everything was fine." Eleanor stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You had no right to access these documents. James, are you going to let your wife—" "Mother," James cut in, staring at the screen. "These numbers, are they accurate?" Theodore shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, we've been trying to find a way to tell you. The situation is quite serious." I clicked to the next slide. 6 months ago, I started working on a solution. Something that would not only save Matthews Industries but transform it for the future. The boardroom door opened and Angela Chen walked in, followed by her executive team. Eleanor's mouth fell open as she recognized the CEO of Suntech. "Ms. Chen?" James stood up, confused. "I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled." "That's because the meeting wasn't with you, James," Angela said, smiling at me. "It was with Sarah." I pulled out the contracts from my briefcase. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Matthews Industries has just entered into a historic partnership with Suntech, a $50 million immediate investment with projected contracts worth billions over the next decade." The room erupted in chaos. Board members talking over each other, James staring at me in shock, Eleanor looking like she might faint. "This is impossible," Eleanor finally managed. You're just a secretary. You couldn't possibly." "Actually," Angela interrupted, "Sarah has proven to be one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever worked with. She saw the potential for this partnership months ago, when everyone else was too caught up in the past to see the future." I distributed copies of the contracts. "The deal is already signed." Suntech gets the manufacturing capability they need, and Matthews Industries gets the innovation and capital it desperately needs. A perfect partnership. James was reading through the contract, his expression a mix of amazement and something else. Pride, maybe. Sarah, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me? I moved to stand beside him. Because you needed to be protected. If the deal hadn't worked out, if I had failed, no one would have known how close we came to losing everything. Your reputation would have been safe. Protected. Eleanor scoffed, though her voice wavered. You went behind everyone's back, made decisions about our family company. I saved our family company, I corrected her firmly. While you were also busy protecting the Matthews legacy, you nearly destroyed it. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what the insiders are too close to notice. The board members were murmuring amongst themselves, reviewing the contracts with growing excitement. The terms were excellent. I had negotiated from a position of knowledge rather than desperation, creating a deal that would benefit both companies. Angela stepped forward. I'd like to make another announcement. Given Sarah's extraordinary work on this deal and her clear vision for the future, Suntech would like to recommend her for a position on the Matthews Industries board. Eleanor made a choking sound. This is absurd. She's not qualified. Actually, Theodore interrupted, looking up from the contracts, looking at what she's accomplished here. I'd say she's more than qualified. This deal, it's brilliant. It saves us from bankruptcy while positioning us for growth we haven't seen in decades. James stood up, taking my hand. I second the nomination. My wife has proven she understands this company better than any of us. One by one, the board members voiced their agreement. Eleanor sat there, her face pale, as her carefully maintained world order crumbled around her. Well, I said, squeezing James's hand, I believe we should vote on it. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up, except Eleanor's. She stared at me, finally seeing me clearly for the first time. How? She whispered. All this time. Because you never bothered to look past what you thought you saw, I replied. You were so convinced I was just a secretary who got lucky that you never noticed I was actually a businesswoman who got smart. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of discussions about integration plans and future strategies. I watched as the old guard of Matthews Industries finally began to understand that their world had changed, and that I had been the one to change it. After the meeting, James pulled me into his office. Why didn't you tell me how bad things were? That the company was nearly bankrupt? I touched his face gently, because I knew you were doing your best. You're brilliant with the technical side, James, but sometimes love means protecting the people we care about while we fix what's broken. He laughed softly. Protect me? Sarah, you saved everything. The company, our future, my family's legacy. You're extraordinary. Does this mean you're not angry I kept it from you? He pulled me close. Angry? I'm in awe of you, and a little bit terrified, if I'm honest. Later that evening, as we were leaving the office, we ran into Eleanor in the lobby. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had at dinner the night before. Sarah, she said, her voice unusually hesitant. I owe you an apology, many apologies actually. I studied her face, seeing the genuine struggle there. You never gave me a chance, Eleanor. You decided who I was the moment you saw me at that desk. Yes, she admitted. I was wrong. So wrong. What you did today, you didn't just save the company. You protected my son, our family name. You did everything I accuse you of being incapable of doing. The question is, I said quietly, what happens now? She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment I saw the proud Matthews matriarch again. But then she surprised me by smiling, a real smile, not her usual social mask. Now I hope you'll give me the chance to get to know my daughter-in-law. The real one, not the one I imagined. James squeezed my hand. Dinner next week, Mother. Maybe at our house this time. Eleanor nodded. I'd like that. And Sarah, thank you for seeing what needed to be done and having the courage to do it. As we walked to our car, James looked at me with a mix of love and admiration. You know, for someone who claims she married into the Matthews family, he might be the best Matthews of us all. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of dismissal and doubt, the months of secret work, the triumph of today's reveal. But most importantly, I thought about the future we could now build together. I didn't marry into the Matthews family, I said, smiling at my husband. I married you. Everything else was just business. He laughed, pulling me close. Remind me never to play poker with you. As we drove home, my phone buzzed with a message from Angela. Dinner next week. We should discuss phase 2 of the expansion plan. I smiled, thinking of all the possibilities ahead. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing people exactly who you are, and watching them realize how wrong they've been all along. Aunt Rachel, are you sure about this? A few days after getting married and moving into our new home, I invited my beloved niece and her mother, my sister, to visit. During their visit, my niece said something that made us uneasy. Hey now, kids shouldn't be messing with grown-ups. My husband quickly scolded her, his worry evident. But there was another reason why he was freaking out. My name is Rachel, and I'm a 30-year-old pharmacist. I often look after my niece who lives nearby, and she has grown very attached to me. She's the cutest, and I end up spoiling her. Every time my sister picks her up, she complains, I know I'm the one who asked you to look after her, but you spoil her too much. Of course, whenever she drops her off, she warns, remember, you can't spoil a child when raising them. But I always joke and reply that parenting is a mother's responsibility. That's how things go every day in my life. My sister is a nurse, so she's busy most of the time. She works in a well-paying hospital ward and also takes night shifts. On the other hand, as a pharmacist working at a drugstore, I have fixed working hours and no night shifts. I'm off on days without outpatient visits, and I don't have to be called in when the clinic is understaffed. So I often end up looking after my niece when my sister is busy. It might be because of her situation, but compared to kids her age, she is very calm and obedient. Girls are said to grow up faster than boys, but in her case, I think her family environment plays a significant role. I've been spending time with her to make sure she doesn't feel lonely, but now she has me wrapped around her finger. She's a quiet child who doesn't seek much attention, but she has this one ability that's hard for others to understand. For instance, when I tell her, the park was empty today, wasn't it? Time flew by quickly. Want to take a shortcut home? She would give an eerie response, saying, Auntie Rachel, we shouldn't go that way. There's something bad there. Let's take the long way around. Incidents like this happen often. What bad thing? I've heard that children have heightened senses that allow them to see and hear things we can't, but is that for real? To be honest, I don't fully believe it. One day, a regular male customer at the pharmacy asked me out for lunch. When you hear regular at a pharmacy, you might think he's sick, but that's not necessarily true. This man got injured while working and is just getting treatment, so he's healthy overall. In the beginning, he visited frequently, and we casually chatted. His injury was healing well, and we were talking about him maybe not needing to come anymore when he asked me out for lunch. After a few lunch dates, he invited me out for dinner, and we had drinks at a rather fancy bar. I started to let my guard down with him and even shared some personal things about myself. It started to dawn on me that crossing that line into a relationship was just a matter of time. Then he proposed to me very passionately. I want to get married to you right now. I can imagine my life without you, Rachel. Hearing him say that made me incredibly happy. I was overwhelmed by the realization that he needed me in his life, and I found no reason to reject him. So I accepted his proposal, feeling as if I were being drawn into it. To my surprise, he picked me up in front of everyone, laughing like a child. I found that side of him charming. Let's have a ceremony just for the two of us right now, he suggested enthusiastically. He mentioned knowing someone in the bridal industry who could host and prioritize our wedding ceremony. While I was delighted, I still wanted to be blessed by our loved ones at our ceremony, so I turned down his suggestion. His disappointed face honestly made my heart ache, but I wanted our union to be blessed by others more than anything else, so I chose to stick with my decision. Even though he looked disappointed, he respected my feelings and withdrew his suggestion quite easily. That was another thing I liked about him. The very next day, which was the happiest day of my life, I shared the news of our engagement with my older sister before she went to work. Seeing her joy, as if it were her own, made me relieved that I didn't have to rush the ceremony. As I was happily recalling yesterday's events, he texted me saying he wanted to see me. When we first started dating, I remembered him mentioning that he had a younger sister. However, I was surprised to hear for the first time that his sister was hospitalized at the moment. When I asked why he hadn't told me earlier, he explained that he didn't want me to accept his marriage proposal out of sympathy for him. He also pointed out the possibility of the opposite happening. I assured him that I wouldn't make decisions based on his sister's illness, and his soft response of "I know" made me fall head over heels for him. But I still pulled myself together to stay grounded. He showed me a picture of his sister and told me, when I told her about you, Rachel, she said she can't wait for the day when she can call you Big Sis. I felt a deep desire to make his sister's wish come true as soon as possible. Holding my hand, he said, "Let's become a family soon." I was moved once again. Even though we weren't married yet, I wasn't against the idea of being called Big Sis by his younger sister. I wanted to visit her in the hospital before we got married, but when I mentioned this to him, he said, after I visited her the other day, her condition worsened and the doctors limited her visitation. "Is it okay for you to be seeing me right now, in a time like this?" I asked. He responded by pulling out a charm from his jacket pocket. "All I can do is pray for my sister. I stopped by the church before I came here to see you, Rachel. There's nothing I can do besides praying for her." "Damn it," he expressed, frustration evident in his voice. Seeing him like this, I deeply wanted to support him. The next day, he suddenly stopped contacting me. I guess his sister's condition had worsened. I hoped he wasn't pushing himself too much. After about 3 days, his usual cheery self showed up at the pharmacy. Although he could have just texted me, he said he wanted to see me in person, which made me happy. We made plans to meet after we both got done with work. When I arrived at our rendezvous right on time, he was already there waiting. As I suspected, he explained that he had been by his sister's bedside due to her deteriorating condition. He told me she was still not allowed to have other visitors, but her condition was now stable, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Then he handed me a letter, saying it was from his sister. I was surprised. I didn't expect to receive a letter from her since I heard she was in critical condition. Reading my expression, he explained, "Seems like she's been writing a lot, and I didn't even know." He then shyly admitted, "Actually, I fell for you at first sight, so I had a crush on you for a long time." It turns out he had been talking about me even before we started dating. The letter contained words of hope for our relationship, dreams of her brother's love being fulfilled. "I hope the day comes when I get to call you Big Sis soon," she wrote. "I wonder if I could even be a flower girl," she wrote, dreaming of me marrying her brother and us becoming a family. Fighting an illness is hard. It's probably a struggle to even use her limited energy to wish for others' happiness, yet her letter was filled with thoughts of her brother getting married to me. Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Let's get married soon," I told him with excitement. It seemed unlikely that his sister would be able to attend our wedding, but I wanted her to witness her beloved brother's big day. After some insistence, I got him to reveal the name of the hospital she was staying at, and I found a wedding chapel nearby. The chapel was visible from the patient's room or the rooftop, making it feel like she could be there with us. I begged to have our ceremony there. He was touched to know that I genuinely cared about his sister, and he was fully on board with the idea. We soon fixed a date. Ideally, we wanted to choose one of those auspicious days, but we couldn't afford to be picky. The date we chose was less expensive and the only one available, so we went with it without hesitation. While preparations were hastily underway, he made a suggestion. He asked if we could wait a bit longer to turn in our marriage certificate. His sister's condition had worsened, and she needed surgery as soon as possible. The medical bill was going to be more expensive than expected, affecting our wedding budget. It didn't feel right to have a wedding under such circumstances either. When I suggested waiting until after his sister's surgery, he exclaimed, if she found out our wedding was canceled because of her, it would ruin her will to heal. Hearing that, I couldn't say anything, and the wedding proceeded as planned. For the time being, I paid for our ceremony in one installment, under the agreement that we would split the costs after his sister's medical bills were paid. Despite the short notice, a decent number of our close friends and family managed to attend our wedding day. My own sister, who's a nurse, even managed to get time off with the help of her colleagues, saying, "This is an important day for my little sister." "I can't miss it," my cute little niece declared. Dressed up and joining the celebration, she quickly got shy around the grown men and ended up hiding behind me. Her actions were so adorable that I couldn't help but chuckle. After the wedding, I moved into our new home. He had suggested I move in with him since his place was too big for him alone. Given that his sister's surgery was going to cost more than we anticipated, we decided not to purchase a newly built home. I could support him for a while, but we couldn't predict when he'd be able to pay back the rest of our expenses. So, I moved into his place. My sister understood my decision but still felt it would be better if we had our own new place. To ease her concerns, I invited my sister and niece over. My boyfriend, now my husband, agreed to the idea. Upon visiting, my sister immediately began inspecting our house, showing her concern. Hey, it's a bit rude to check every corner of our house, sis. So, I see the 32-year-old CEO of an import company makes good money, huh? Are you satisfied now? Yes, I suppose so, she replied, and my husband and I let out a sigh of relief. The only downside was that moving here made it more difficult to frequently babysit or take care of my niece. It was too far for a 5-year-old to travel alone, and with my duties of nursing my husband's sister, I was too occupied. That's when my niece, out of the blue, said something eerie. Rachel, I think you should leave this house. Huh? Why? Because another woman is already living here. Hey, even if you're a kid, there are things you should and shouldn't say. My husband angrily turned towards my sister, questioning her parenting. Can you perhaps see her? When my niece nodded yes, my husband's anger seemed to dissipate into fright. My niece is quite sensitive. Perhaps you're not good with this kind of thing. No, that's not the issue. Kids shouldn't be messing with grown-ups. I'm not messing with you. It's someone you know really well. A woman with her black hair always tied back, thin eyes, slightly overweight, with a mole near her eye. My husband's face turned pale. He was clearly scared, but it seemed like there was something more to it. What confirmed my skepticism was my niece's next question. What's your real name, uncle? You use so many, have you forgotten it? Even trembling, my husband raised his voice. You little brat, don't spout nonsense. Hey, don't yell at her just because you're scared. Shut up. My husband shoved me away. He seemed more than just panicked with fear. Even if what my niece said was strange, it always turned out to be true. My usually gentle husband wouldn't change this drastically without reason. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just reacting out of fear. I whispered to my sister and asked her to check inside my husband's bag in the meantime. I decided to give up for the time being to get my husband's attention. I'm sorry, my niece was out of line. It's okay as long as you get it. Dang, my precious day off got ruined because of all this. He glared at my niece, but she wasn't bothered. She simply looked away with a stoic expression. Oh yeah, you have a long business trip starting tomorrow, right? I used soothing words to placate my husband. He gradually calmed down, and the topic of conversation shifted to what he should bring back for souvenirs. However, we didn't get to discuss the details. The reason was the name on the driver's license my sister found in his bag. It was a name I didn't recognize. Furthermore, she found multiple phones in his bag. Rachel, your guy's probably sketchy. Aren't these burner phones? Burner phones? The kind used in scams and such. Exactly, registered under someone else's or even false names. It's illegal. And what if it is? Thanks to that, Rachel's been eating well and enjoying fancy dates, hasn't she? He said, as if I was his partner in crime. Cut the crap. My sister is nothing like a piece of trash like you. My sister snapped back. My niece, still stoic, said, there's a woman clinging to him like she'll never let him go. Watch your mouth, kid. Even if you try to scare me, I won't fall for it again, he retorted. He seemed less fearful and more brazen now that his true identity was starting to be exposed. The fact that he wasn't trying to escape showed his confidence in not getting arrested. He seemed almost inwardly laughing, so assured he was, until the moment his world came crashing down. That moment came when several policemen burst in, shouting "Police," and surrounded him. My sister had already found the driver's license and called the police before telling me. All our conversations had been overheard by them. There had already been several complaints filed by different women, and the man's description matched those provided. The police were eager to catch him in the act if possible, and the situation was ideal. My sister didn't want to let him escape and wanted to protect me. It was a miraculous arrest with our interests aligning in an instant. Since we hadn't formalized our marriage, the man had no legal claim over me. The man I had thought of as my husband was now just a criminal being taken away, and I could only watch in stunned silence. Later, during the police interrogation, he seemed to resign himself or perhaps calculated that confessing would lighten his punishment. Without causing any further trouble for the police, he spoke surprisingly honestly. He admitted he intended to commit marriage fraud against me and drain me financially, likely for the medical bills of his non-existent sister. He also confessed to killing a woman he had previously dated during an argument about his true identity, which she had threatened to report to the police. Although he was frightened when my niece spoke up, he didn't seem to fully believe her, which might explain why he confessed. The police informed me of everything. The night he was taken away, he woke up in his cell choking with long hairs entwined around his neck. He confessed his wrongdoings, fearing he'd be cursed otherwise. When I asked him if it was true about the hair, he laughed and said, "Of course not." He insisted he had finger marks around his neck, but apparently he was the only one who could see them. It seems that some people, when they've committed a crime, are overwhelmed by guilt and resort to escapism. Yet, remembering the image of the woman my niece had described sent chills down my spine. As the investigation proceeded, according to the man's statement, a woman's skeleton was discovered in the woods. It made the news, and when the woman's photo was released, it matched my niece's description perfectly. My sister and I were filled with renewed fear. The man's fraudulent activities were also reported in the news, and more victims started to speak up. It seems like his list of crimes is only going to grow. The man was sentenced to severe punishment behind bars. Inside, he had to be terrified of the woman's spirit every day. I was simply astounded at my lack of judgment in having once decided to marry such a man. The trial for the incident in which I was victimized has ended, and I am finally free from everything. However, I've had enough of marriage. I moved back near my sister's house, so I'm still looking after my niece. Today, while I was dropping her off at my sister's house, I opened up to my sister about my hesitations toward marriage and love. She said, "You're just saying that now. You never know where or when you'll meet someone. You could fall in love after you leave here today." She didn't take it seriously. Time passed and summer came. Every year, I take my niece to the local summer festival. This year, as I was walking hand in hand with her dressed in her new sundress, a man walking in front of us dropped his wallet. I picked it up and tried to call out to him, but my voice didn't reach him due to the loud surrounding noise. I picked up my niece and jogged to catch up to him, returning his lost item. He thanked me and asked to treat us to something. This sparked a connection between us. In the end, the three of us had a blast at the fair that day. "You're lucky, Rachel. You've been tied to this man before you were even born." "What? Hey, what are you saying?" I blushed deep red at her words, which seemed to make him blush as well. "You never know where love will find you." My sister's words flashed in my mind as fireworks lit up the night sky. I had a feeling that a new romance was on the horizon.
I was worried if my mom talked about leaving money because they don't have a big house. Surprise. I didn't think she'd give Monica a gift before leaving. Maybe mom wanted to show love to Monica her own way. While talking with my husband Arthur, I opened a gift from my mother-in-law meant for our daughter. I wondered what it could be. When I saw what was inside, I got really mad and threw it away. Arthur, changing nearby, was shocked to find it in the trash. "Mary, what are you doing?" "Mom got a gift for Monica," Arthur scolded, unaware. "Did you see what's inside? You'd want to throw it away too," I exclaimed. Arthur looked puzzled, then retrieved the bag from the trash to see for himself. "You must be joking." "My name's Mary, and I'm a 30-year-old stay-at-home mom. Arthur and I have been married for 3 years. I used to work, but after our daughter Monica was born last year, I quit my job. We both love our daughter dearly, and being a family of 3 brings us so much happiness. I wish this warm time could last forever. But things have changed. One concern I have is my relationship with my mother-in-law. At first, she seemed really kind. She accepted our marriage easily when we told her about it. Even though we didn't visit her often, whenever we did, she treated me well, and I thought we had a good relationship. Things started to shift about a year after we got married. Sadly, my father-in-law passed away from an illness. My mother-in-law was deeply saddened because she loved him very much. She was very low, and Arthur didn't seem to know how to comfort her. As she slowly started to feel better, which relieved both Arthur and me, she began treating me harshly. It seemed like after losing her husband, she realized her only source of affection was her son. She started being cold towards me, perhaps feeling jealous that I had taken her son away from her. She also took pride in the family property and lineage passed down from her late father-in-law. Once she directly told me, "Don't assume you'll inherit this house easily." Even though the property was valuable, it originally belonged to her husband's family, so logically it would pass down to Arthur, not me. But after becoming distant, my mother-in-law began treating me like a nuisance and started tormenting me. "Mary, when will you have a baby? It's your responsibility to give birth to an heir. If you can't do that, you'll have to leave Arthur." This became her attitude towards me. Every time we met, she pressured me about having a baby. I gave birth to a child last year, which was a surprise considering the stress I was under. However, my mother-in-law wasn't satisfied that our child was a daughter. She simply said, "Well then, next year," as if it were expected. Having children in consecutive years is difficult. Also, Arthur and I hadn't even discussed having a second child yet. When I mentioned this, my mother-in-law insisted, "What are you talking about? Your duty is to give birth to a male heir, no matter how many children it takes." She keeps repeating the same things so much that it's shocking. It's like she's stuck on a loop, saying the exact same phrases over and over again. Sometimes I wonder if she's like an iRobot programmed to only say those things. In today's world, her obsession with having a male heir is incredibly outdated and absurd. I wish she would let go of these old-fashioned ideas and appreciate her granddaughter, Monica, who is here now. Every time I see her, it just disgusts me more. But when she's around my husband, her son, she puts on a different face. She acts like she's understanding and kind towards me. The contrast between how she acts when it's just the two of us and when my husband is there is so stark. It's like she's two different people. I almost want to take pictures and compare them. No matter how well she hides it from my husband, her awful treatment of me, her daughter-in-law, raises serious doubts about her as a person. Doesn't she think about the possibility of me telling my husband about how she really behaves? Or does she believe she can keep fooling him forever? Throughout my pregnancy, she relentlessly harassed me, causing a lot of distress. Whenever my husband wasn't around, she would approach me and say things like, "You understand, right? If it's not a boy, I won't forgive you. If it's a girl, you should consider abortion." Hearing those words made me seriously question her humanity. When I objected, saying it was going too far, she responded, "A girl will just get married and leave. It would be a waste of money and time." I remember thinking to myself, this woman is beyond hope. For me, the gender of the baby didn't matter. All I wanted was a healthy child whom I could love unconditionally. My mother-in-law's words caused me a lot of stress. Each time she made these hurtful comments, I would respond vaguely, just trying to endure until the baby was born. When my mother-in-law found out the baby was a girl, her reaction was as awful as I had anticipated. It was then that her true, unpleasant nature, usually hidden from my husband, became evident. "Why did you have a girl? I've told you countless times to have a boy." That was the first thing my mother-in-law said when she visited the hospital and saw her granddaughter. My husband, completely unaware, seemed bewildered by her comment. My mother-in-law often visited our apartment when my husband wasn't around. She used to say, "I'm here to educate you as my daughter-in-law," but it felt more like she came to torment me under the guise of giving advice. Her so-called guidance was filled with sarcastic remarks. She'd say things like, "You really can't cook, can you? Aren't you embarrassed to make such awful food? Poor Arthur, maybe that's why you couldn't have a boy." These criticisms were baseless, but she always found ways to blame my homemaking skills for not giving birth to a son. She criticizes everything, even linking it to the idea of having a boy. My mother-in-law is always finding fault. I feel like everything I do is wrong and she insists I redo it. Her frequent visits with this attitude were really draining. Each time I have to deal with her, I find myself disliking her more and more. I have my own way of doing things around the house, and I'm tired of constantly hearing about having a boy. I wonder if I should have stood up for myself more. But deep down, I sympathize with my mother-in-law, who is grieving the loss of my father-in-law. I held on to a faint hope that she might return to the kind person she used to be. Maybe my optimism made me overlook her behavior. One day, as usual, she came over, complaining about various things, and then started her usual mantra, "We should have a boy." She even mentioned a name she had in mind, Thomas. It was getting harder to tolerate her. As these days went by, my daughter's second birthday was approaching. I was busy preparing to make her day special, but then my mother-in-law showed up, as if on cue when my husband was at work. Even on a day meant for celebrating my daughter's birthday, I didn't want her there. Actually, I never do. I paused the birthday preparations, brewed some tea, and entertained her in the living room. "Why is she still a girl?" my mother-in-law remarked, looking at my daughter. "Please stop," I pleaded. "Today is my daughter's birthday. I just wish she would leave already." Lately, she hasn't been as critical about household chores. I've started to figure out what might please her, but her comments about having a boy and continuing the family line haven't stopped. "Are you pregnant yet? There won't be a small age gap anymore, so you should hurry up and have a boy." I've said it many times, but my husband and I aren't desperate to have a child. No one knows what the future holds with having children. We were fortunate to have a daughter shortly after getting married, but there are couples who struggle for years without success. Children don't come just because you want them to. It should be obvious with a little thought. I must have been under a lot of stress. This was the first time I firmly and clearly expressed this to my mother-in-law. When I did, she glared at me angrily. "What kind of daughter-in-law am I dealing with here? It's because of your attitude that you haven't had a boy. You're influencing Arthur too, aren't you?" "Of course you are. Otherwise, Arthur would want a boy just like me." I was stunned. Arguing with my mother-in-law seemed pointless. "I've told you many times you're useless until you have a boy." I couldn't let her continue to disrespect me like this anymore. Enough is enough. My husband has never spoken to me like that. We've built a happy family with our daughter. It's you who's disrupting that. If you plan to tear apart my family, don't come back to this house. I finally said it all, releasing my pent-up frustrations. My mother-in-law listened, her fists clenched and hands shaking as if she wanted to retort. But just then, Arthur arrived home. Immediately her demeanor changed. "Arthur, welcome home," she greeted him warmly. I was disgusted by her sudden shift. "Mom, I didn't know you were here," Arthur said. "Yes, but I'm leaving now," she replied curtly. "No, wait. I forgot. This is for Monica's birthday," she added, handing me a paper bag. "Huh," was all she said before leaving with a smile. Arthur and I were left bewildered. "Was Mom all right?" he asked. "We were on the verge of a fight, but then you came back." I've been venting about my mother-in-law to Arthur for a while now. At his request, I recorded and played back our conversations. His reaction was, "This is terrible." Later he said to me, "If Mom does something outrageous again, let me know." He's been supportive of me, and that brings us to today. I recorded my interaction with my mother-in-law today and played it for Arthur. "Well, you two really had a disagreement. You might be in trouble if she brings up inheritance issues, especially since they don't even have a big house. But I didn't expect her to give Monica a birthday gift when she left. Maybe Mom is trying to show affection for Monica in her own way." While chatting with Arthur, I opened the present from my mother-in-law meant for our daughter. I was curious to see what she had given us. With a little excitement, I checked the contents of the gift, but I was instantly filled with anger when I saw what was inside the box. "What on earth is this?" I exclaimed in frustration and threw the gift into the trash. Arthur, who was changing clothes in the room, was surprised to see the gift in the trash. "Mary, what are you doing? Mom went out of her way to buy a gift for Monica." "That's too much," he scolded me, unaware of what had happened. I knew Arthur would understand once I explained. "Did you see what's inside? You'd want to throw away this kind of gift too." "It's unbelievable," I told him, frustrated. Arthur looked puzzled, then retrieved the paper bag from the trash and looked inside. "You're kidding, right?" he said in disbelief. The gift from my mother-in-law was beyond belief. One item was a stack of adoption papers suggesting she wanted us to give up our daughter. The other was a virility drug, seemingly pushing us to try harder to have a boy. Even Arthur was shaken by her audacious actions. "This is too much," he muttered quietly, pocketing the car keys and heading for the door. I followed Arthur, holding our daughter tightly. We drove straight to his parents' house, seething with anger. Neither of us spoke during the drive, but we shared the same intense emotions. Soon we arrived at his parents' house. Arthur opened the door without bothering to ring the bell and walked in. I followed him inside. In the living room, my mother-in-law was casually sipping tea. "Oh, you're here. Weren't you celebrating Monica's birthday?" Her nonchalant demeanor implied that the gift she gave was no big deal. In a tense voice, my husband asked, "Mom, what's the meaning of this gift you sent?" His voice was clearly filled with anger. Unfazed or perhaps unaware, my mother-in-law chuckled smugly. "I thought it was time to seriously consider having a son. You've said you weren't planning for a second child, right? If you give up your first child for adoption, you'll have a reason to try again." "That's absurd. Suggesting we give up our precious daughter for adoption just to have a male heir. You should understand your responsibility as the only son of this family." It seemed my mother-in-law had run out of patience, revealing her true beliefs even to her son. Gently yet firmly, my husband responded, "I see. So that's how you think, Mom?" "Yes, exactly. You need to have a son to continue the family line." "Enough of that. I love Monica and I love Mary. Isn't it more important to have a family bonded by love rather than just lineage? I've always valued you as a parent who shares our blood. Please take care of Monica as well." Even considering giving her up for adoption is completely out of line, my husband said firmly to his mother, his anger tempered with gentleness. But it seemed his kindness went unnoticed by my mother-in-law. "Ah, I see. You don't understand me as well as I thought you did," she responded. "There's no point in having a girl. Eventually she'll marry into another family. It's your duty to continue our respected family line," she continued, unmoved by his words. My husband relaxed his fists. "It seems my words won't reach you anymore. If this house and lineage mean so much to you, then why don't you take care of them all by yourself? I won't stand in your way." My mother-in-law tilted her head in confusion. "What are you talking about? You're the only son of this family. Naturally, you will inherit this house and land and become the head of the family." My husband smiled slightly and said to her, "No, I refuse. I'm cutting ties with you and becoming part of Mary's family." "What?" My mother-in-law was taken aback by my husband's unexpected declaration of adoption. That's unacceptable. You have to inherit this house and have a son," she protested. "I'm tired of all of that. I can't forgive you anymore. You've crossed a line. You've gone too far, he replied firmly. Reflect on your actions alone. Arthur, wait. My mother-in-law bowed her head and tried to cling to my husband's leg. He gently shook off her hand, and we left her house together. Later, we explained everything to my parents, and my husband officially became an adopted son of my family. From that point on, my mother-in-law was no longer a part of our lives. According to what my husband heard through a relative, my mother-in-law was bedridden due to the shock of being abandoned by her only son. Despite this, I feel no pity or sympathy for her. She brought so much turmoil into our lives with her selfish actions. Afterward, my husband, our daughter, and I moved into a newly purchased home. Part of the reason was to avoid any further intrusion from my mother-in-law, but also because it felt like the right time for us to have our own place. Now the three of us live happily together in our beautiful new home. I'm grateful that my husband prioritized our family. Whatever challenges the future may bring, I know we'll face them together and continue to enjoy our daily lives. Hello everyone. My name is Taylor. I am a single mother who faced many challenges to raise my son, Eric. Many single mothers have supportive families. I thought I did too, but I was wrong and found out in the worst way. Thankfully, I managed to protect myself and my son from the people who tried to ruin our lives. My ex-husband Carl is an abusive person. Just thinking about him makes me feel sick. There was a time when I was deeply in love with him. But things got bad after we got married. Carl was a wonderful boyfriend, but as a husband, he was a nightmare. He was controlling and gradually became abusive. I stayed in the marriage for over 8 years because he manipulated me and trapped me with a baby. I believed my son deserved a father, so I didn't leave. However, things got much worse when Eric was 5. One day, Carl started to hit me very hard. My poor son saw this and tried to stop his dad. Carl was so angry that he pushed Eric to the floor. That was the breaking point for me. I called Child Protective Services, CPS, and the police, which was enough to keep Carl away from us. However, he was determined to get back at me. He said, "You think you can run away from me, Taylor? That will never happen. Sooner or later, I will have you and my son back in my house. You just wait and see. We are getting a divorce, Carl. There is no way I will allow you near me or my son again. Even if we divorce, I'll find a way to take Eric. I am his dad, and I have rights. He will be in my home, and so will you. Mark my words." Carl's behavior and violent history made me very paranoid. My son was extremely traumatized and had to go to therapy to deal with his issues. After a long court battle, Carl and I were finally divorced. I didn't stop there. I moved near my parents and sister to stay safe from Carl. I even got restraining orders against him. It was the most horrific time of my life. Carl never knew where I had moved. He might have guessed, but he didn't have my exact address. Being near my parents and sister made me feel safe. However, my parents were not very supportive of my divorce. They said, "Was it really necessary to get a divorce? You two could have attended therapy and talked it out. It's not a big deal. Poor little Eric had to lose his dad over your problems. That's so unfair. He must be devastated not being able to see his dad." "Are you serious right now? Carl used to beat me up, Mom, and he even hit Eric when my son tried to protect me. How can you not see what a monster Carl is? Mom, Dad, you need to be more understanding of Taylor. She has been through a lot. You have no right to make her feel guilty. She did the right thing," my sister said. At first, Mom and Dad would talk to me about letting Eric see his dad, but I never allowed it. My parents were never happy with my decision. They'd always said, "Why don't you let Carl visit Eric? He must miss his son." How would you feel if I wasn't around when you were growing up? I know I would have been devastated. Taylor, you grew up in a home with 2 parents. You can't be so selfish with Eric. He deserves the love of his father. Soon he will start resenting you for not allowing his father to be in his life. What are you even talking about? Eric is terrified of his dad. He begs me never to let Carl near us again. Neither of us wants anything to do with him. You may be letting Carl's bad actions color your view. You shouldn't have involved Eric in your problems. He's scared of Carl because you've made him that way. That's unfair, Dad. If Carl was a good man and a loving father, he wouldn't have hurt me in front of Eric, or at all. No matter how hard I tried, they never agreed with my decision. Over time, though, they seemed to accept it. They became close to Eric and did a great job as grandparents. Eric also formed strong bonds with them and his aunt, Blair. I think part of the reason my parents stopped pressuring me was because Blair and I were financially supporting them. Dad doesn't have a good job and Mom doesn't work, so we sent them monthly allowances. Money might have been why they eventually stopped bringing up the matter. Eric and I were doing well in our new home. He started school locally, and I had a good job at an office. Things were going smoothly, and I was happy being close to family. However, I didn't expect my loved ones to betray me. About a year after leaving Carl, I was preparing for a business trip to another city. I couldn't bring Eric along because there were no childcare arrangements at work. I was stuck, wondering what to do with Eric. That's when my mom and dad suggested a plan. They said, "We heard you'll be going on a business trip soon. Stuart and I have been thinking about babysitting Eric for you. We can stay at your house and take care of both Eric and the house." "Are you sure about this? Eric can be quite a handful. Plus, leaving your apartment empty might be risky, don't you think? It's just for a few days, so I don't think it'll be a problem. Besides, we love Eric and he loves us. I'm sure he'll enjoy spending time with us." "Yeah, we'll stay here and take care of everything. Your house will be safe while you're away. It's like getting two benefits at once." "Okay, since you're so insistent, I'll leave Eric and my house with you." I agreed to let them babysit Eric and stay at my house until I returned. I felt satisfied with the plan because I trusted my parents completely. Now I know I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have trusted them at all. My business trip was just a week later. I flew out that night after saying goodnight to Eric. I had to leave a day early to prepare for a big client meeting the next morning. I called my parents and Eric from the hotel after I arrived. Everything seemed fine. Little did I know what was about to happen. At night, while I was in my hotel room preparing for my meeting the next day, Blair called me. Her call made me anxious. I immediately thought something might be wrong at home. I answered nervously. "Hey Taylor, have you already left for your business trip?" Blair asked. "Yes, I flew out yesterday. It's a short trip." "Have you left Eric with Mom and Dad?" I replied. "Yes. Is everything okay?" "They're staying at your house with Eric. They're taking good care of him, and he loves being with them," Blair said. "Taylor, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think you made a mistake leaving Eric with them. I don't think they have good intentions. Something doesn't feel right," Blair continued hesitantly. "What do you mean? Tell me what's going on. You're scaring me, Blair," I urged, feeling a knot in my stomach. "I think Mom and Dad might try to take Eric to see Carl. They've been against your decisions about the restraining orders and your divorce. I have a bad feeling they might try to reunite Eric with him," Blair explained. "What? No, they can't do that. There must be some misunderstanding. They didn't approve of my divorce, but they wouldn't side with someone who abused me," I protested in disbelief. "I understand you trust them, but please stay cautious. If you need anything, I'm here for you. Remember that," Blair urged. "Thanks, Blair. I'll keep that in mind. Don't worry," I replied. Blair's words lingered in my mind, unsettling me deeply. I couldn't shake off the unease, so I decided to call my parents and check in with them. I said, "Hey Mom, can you pass the phone to Eric? I miss him a lot and want to talk." "Sure, Taylor. Just a moment," Mom replied. "Mom, are you there?" "Hi, Eric. I just wanted to check in. Is everything okay? Are you having fun?" I asked. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Grandma and Grandpa have called the Dad." "Oh no, my phone's about to die. I'm so sorry, Taylor. I have to charge it now. Why don't you call back later? Eric's fine and playing with us. Don't worry about a thing. Take care. Bye." Something about Eric's attempt to speak and how Mom quickly ended the call made me suspicious. My mind raced, so I decided to review the security camera footage. I didn't have cameras inside, but I did outside. To my shock, there was my ex-husband's car in the driveway. I watched the footage and saw my mom opening the door for him. After watching the footage, I was furious and scared for Eric's safety, and my own. Carl wasn't supposed to know where we lived. I had a restraining order against him. He should never have been near my son. I immediately called my parents in anger, recording the call. "Mom, why is Carl at my house? What's going on? Who gave you permission to let him in?" "Taylor, you need to calm down. Carl isn't here." "Why would you think that?" my mom replied defensively. "Mom, I can see his car parked in my driveway. Did you forget I have security cameras outside? I saw you open the door for him," I insisted. There was a long silence on their end. Neither of them said a word. I could sense I had caught them off guard, but what happened next shocked me even more. "Look, I understand you're upset with Carl and us, but you're being unreasonable. You need to give us some understanding. I'm very disappointed in you, Taylor. You can't keep a son away from his father. Eric needs Carl in his life. You're not being a good mother. Please tell me you're joking. Carl physically abused me. He even hurt Eric when he tried to protect me. How can you allow Carl back into his life? I have a restraining order against him, for God's sake." "That was in the past, Taylor. People can change. Your restraining order was causing issues. So yes, your mom and I decided to step in. We gave Carl your address since you wouldn't. We've reunited father and son. They're happy together. Mom, Dad, you have 5 minutes to get Carl out of there. If you don't, there will be consequences. Don't threaten us, Taylor. We're your parents. You're 3,000 miles away. Carl will stay here as long as he wants. We're planning a picnic tomorrow." "I'm hanging up now before you say anything else," Mom retorted before ending the call. I literally gave you 5 minutes to get Carl out. When that time passed and his car was still in the driveway, I had enough. I felt scared and betrayed. I knew I had to act fast, so I called law enforcement. I explained everything and told them to arrest Carl. I also instructed them to take Eric from my parents and give him to Blair. The police arrived quickly, thanks to living near a station. I watched through CCTV as they confronted my parents and Carl. Mom and Dad looked panicked as the police moved in to arrest Carl. Mom called me, furious. "Taylor, what's wrong with you? Did you call the cops on us? How could you do this? Carl could go to jail." "He will go to jail, Mom, and so will you if you don't leave my house right now. I don't want you and Dad on my property again. I've called Blair, she's coming to take Eric. You'll never come near us again." "How dare you, Taylor? You're a horrible woman. I wish you were never born. You can't kick us out and take our grandchild from us. We won't let that happen." "Good luck with that, Mom and Dad. The police will stop you if you try anything. They know Eric is going with Blair. You can't do this. We have grandparent rights. We'll sue you." "Good luck trying to fight me in court. It'll be interesting to see the judge's reaction when she learns you allowed an abusive man into my home despite a restraining order. You won't stand a chance." Before my parents could respond, the police emerged with handcuffs. Carl was led to a waiting police car and placed in the back seat. Seeing him taken away brought me a sense of relief and satisfaction. The police then turned their attention to my parents, who were flustered, and my dad began shouting at them, likely arguing about Eric. At that moment, my sister Blair arrived. She showed her ID to the police and took Eric with her. My parents tried to intervene, but the police intervened and prevented them from causing any trouble. The officers stayed until my parents gathered their belongings and left. Blair locked up the house and took the keys from them. My parents tried calling me to scream about the situation, but I didn't pick up. They started sending me strange and threatening texts, which I recorded because they were alarming. Here's what they said. "What you did today wasn't right, Taylor. There will be consequences. You had no right to take Eric away from us and Carl. I can't believe you're my daughter. I hate you. You won't keep us away, Taylor. You work. You can't be with Eric all the time. We'll get visitation rights from court, then take Eric from you. One call to CPS from us and Eric could be taken away. We're smarter than you. We'll call CPS with bad stuff. They'll place Eric with us, and he'll never return to you." "That won't happen. Eric stays with me, and I'll protect him with everything I have. We know Eric's school and your address. We'll find a way to be with him. You can't stop us." "Yeah, if you act crazy, we'll take him away from you. You'll never see him again." My parents are not only horrible but also foolish. It's clear to me now that they still expect everything to go their way. They have no idea what I have planned. Time will reveal everything to them. Carl made a big mistake by teaming up with them. He'll face consequences too. I wrapped up my work as quickly as possible and rushed home. Blair had kept Eric safe at her house. Eric was visibly relieved to see me. "Mom, you came back. I was afraid you wouldn't," Eric said anxiously. "Eric, what are you talking about? I went on a business trip." "Of course, I was coming back," I reassured him. "Dad said you left me, Mom. He showed me pictures of his house and said he'd take me with him. I was scared. I didn't want to go," Eric explained, clearly distressed. "Eric, listen to me. I will never let Carl take you or even come near you again. I'm staying right here with you, I promise," I assured him firmly. I spent a long time comforting Eric and ensuring he felt safe. It was upsetting to hear that Carl had been filling his head with lies about me abandoning him and trying to take him away. I was furious with Carl. CPS got involved and listened to Eric's account. They recommended therapy, and Eric is already attending sessions. I've also enrolled both of us in group therapy to help us heal from our experiences. Our therapist has been wonderful and supportive throughout. My lawyer used all the evidence of Carl's crimes in court. He's facing charges for attempted kidnapping and violating the restraining order, which could lead to jail time. Right now, I'm working on legally severing Carl's parental rights to Eric. My son deserves a good father, not an abuser like Carl. My lawyer is competent, and we're hopeful for a successful outcome. Eric, listen to me. I won't let Carl come near you ever again. I promise I'm staying right here with you, I reassured him. I spent a long time comforting Eric and making sure he felt okay. Carl had been saying hurtful things to Eric, like I abandoned him and Carl was going to take him away. I was really angry at Carl for spreading lies. Child Protective Services, CPS, got involved and listened to Eric's side of the story. They suggested therapy for him, and he's already attending sessions. I've also joined group therapy with Eric to help us both heal from what happened. Our therapist is really supportive and helps us work through our feelings. All the evidence of Carl's crimes was used by my lawyer in court. He's facing charges for trying to kidnap Eric and violating a restraining order, and he might go to jail. Right now, I'm working on making sure Carl loses his rights to be Eric's father. My son deserves a good dad, not someone who hurts him like Carl. My lawyer is very good, and we're hoping the legal process goes smoothly. My parents tried to sue me for grandparent rights, but the judge quickly dismissed their case when they saw my evidence and the texts my parents sent. I took further steps and got restraining orders against them, which the judge approved right away. I've moved with Eric to a different state because I got promoted at work to a higher position in a new city. It helped me get away from my parents. Blair visits us sometimes, and she's also cut off contact with our parents and might move closer to me soon. My parents are struggling financially now that Blair and I have stopped helping them out. They had to find extra jobs, and lawyer fees drained their savings, making them unstable. Meanwhile, Eric and I are doing really well in our new environment. I have no plans to reconnect with my parents or let Carl hurt my son again.
The crystal champagne glasses clinked around me as I stood in my family's grand ballroom, my hand tightly gripping Daniel's. The annual Harrison Foundation Gala was in full swing, Boston's elite mingling and networking in their finest evening wear. But all eyes were on us, or more specifically, on the simple silver band adorning my left hand. A teacher. My mother's perfectly painted lips barely moved as she hissed the word. Alexandra, please tell me this is some sort of joke. My name is Alexandra Harrison, and at 25, I was about to shatter my family's carefully constructed world. The Harrisons weren't just wealthy. We were old money, Boston aristocracy, with an investment firm that had been shaping the city's financial landscape for 3 generations. Daniel is a high school physics teacher, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. And we're getting married in June. My father's face darkened as he looked Daniel up and down, taking in his rented tuxedo and modest watch. To Charles Harrison IE, these weren't just fashion choices. They were damning evidence of what he considered a fatal flaw, being poor. Outside. Now, my father's command cut through the ambient chatter of the gala. Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode toward his study, my mother following in his wake. Daniel squeezed my hand. Want me to come with you? I shook my head, forcing a smile. I need to handle this alone. The walk to my father's study felt like a march to the executioner's block. The sounds of the gala faded behind me as I made my way down the familiar hallway, past the portraits of Harrison patriarchs who had built our family's legacy. My grandfather's stern face seemed to judge me from his gilt frame as I passed. Inside the study, my father stood behind his massive mahogany desk, the same desk where he taught me about investment strategies when I was 12. My mother perched on the leather sofa, her champagne glass now filled with something stronger. Have you completely lost your mind? My father's voice was quiet, which was always more dangerous than his shouting. A public school teacher. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? Daniel is brilliant, I said, standing my ground. He's dedicated to his students, passionate about education. Passionate about our money, you mean? My mother interjected. Really, Alexandra, how naive can you be? The irony of her words almost made me laugh. If they only knew that Daniel had tried to talk me out of the engagement when he learned about my family's wealth, worried that it would change our relationship. He doesn't want our money, I said firmly. In fact, he's the one who suggested a prenup. My father scoffed. Of course he did. He's playing the long game, making himself look noble. I wasn't born yesterday, Alexandra. No, I agreed, feeling a surge of courage. You were born into wealth and privilege, just like I was. But Daniel built himself up from nothing. He worked his way through college, earned his master's degree while teaching full-time. Spare us the Hallmark movie plot, my mother cut in. This isn't about his inspiring backstory. This is about the future of the Harrison name. The future? I felt my careful composure starting to crack. You mean the future where I take over Harrison Investment Group and marry someone from your approved list of suitable bachelors? Someone like Thomas Wellington Ivy, perhaps? My father's eyes narrowed. Thomas would be an excellent match. The Wellington Group's merger with Harrison would create one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast. I don't love Thomas. Love. My father spat the word like it was poison. You think love built this? He gestured to the room around us, to the wealth that had defined our family for generations. Strategy built this. Smart alliances. Understanding your place in the greater scheme. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm marrying Daniel. I don't need your approval, but I'd like your blessing. My father walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of me. If you marry that man, you are no longer a Harrison. No trust fund, no inheritance, no position at the firm. You'll be cut off completely. Is that what you want?" The threat hung in the air between us. The Harrison Trust Fund wasn't just money. It was security, opportunity, power. Walking away from it meant starting from nothing. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. "Yes, if those are my options." "Alexandra," my mother stood up, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she used when she wanted something. "Think about what you're doing. You've worked so hard, gotten your MBA, prepared to take over the firm. Would you throw all that away for some teacher?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "I'm choosing my own path." "Then you choose it with nothing," my father said coldly. "Harrison Investment Group will never be yours. You'll never see a penny of your trust fund. You want to live like common people. Fine, get out." My mother gasped. "Charles." "No, Margaret, she's made her choice." He turned his back on me, walking to the window. "You have until morning to clear out your things from the house. After that, you're no longer welcome here." I stood there for a moment, waiting for them to change their minds, to show some sign that their love for me was stronger than their pride. But my father remained at the window, and my mother simply sank back onto the sofa, lifting her glass to her lips with a trembling hand. "Goodbye then," I said softly, turning to leave. At the door, I paused. "You know, Grandfather used to tell me that true wealth isn't about money. It's about having the courage to build something meaningful." My father's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. I walked back to the ballroom, where Daniel was waiting anxiously. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. "I'm so sorry, Alex," he said, pulling me close. "We don't have to do this. Your future, your family's company." I silenced him with a kiss, not caring about the scandalized whispers around us. "You are my future. The rest we'll build together." We left the gala without saying goodbye to anyone. As we drove away from my family's estate in Daniel's beat-up Honda Civic, I watched the lights of my childhood home fade in the rearview mirror. I should have felt scared, starting over with nothing but my education and determination. Instead, I felt strangely free. What my parents didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had been preparing for this possibility. The past 3 years, while working at Harrison Investment Group, I had been developing my own investment strategy, focusing on emerging technologies and sustainable energy. I had also been building connections, quiet ones, with people who saw the future the same way I did. I had $50,000 saved in a private account, not much by Harrison standards, but enough to start something. And I had an idea, one that would either prove my parents absolutely right about me or show them just how wrong they'd been. Daniel pulled up to our small apartment, my new home. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one more time. "It's not too late to go back." I looked at him, this brilliant, kind man who taught physics to inner-city kids because he believed education could change lives, who had supported my dreams even when they seemed impossible. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. "Besides, they didn't just give me an ultimatum, they gave me a challenge." "A challenge?" I smiled, thinking about the plan that was already forming in my mind. "They think I can't succeed without their money and connections. Fine. I'll build something bigger than Harrison Investment Group ever was. And I'll do it my way." Little did I know then just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The next 10 years would test everything I believed about myself, about business, and about what it means to create true wealth. But that night, sitting in Daniel's old car, holding the hand of the man I loved, I felt nothing but excitement for the journey ahead. What I didn't realize was that this journey would eventually lead me right back to Harrison Investment Group. But not in the way anyone could have predicted. 10 years can change everything. I sat in my corner office on the 50th floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper, looking at the email that had just appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Harrison Investment Group seeking strategic partnership." "You need to see this," my CFO, Sarah Chin, said from the doorway. She walked in, tablet in hand. "Harrison Investment Group's financials just went public. They're in worse shape than we thought." I took the tablet, scanning the numbers. The story they told was grim. Harrison Investment Group, once the crown jewel of Boston's financial district, was hemorrhaging clients. Their old-school investment approach had failed to adapt to changing markets. They'd missed the tech boom, dismissed sustainable energy as a passing fad, and clung to traditional investments until it was too late. Their stock has dropped 60% in the last year, Sarah continued. They're looking for a buyer. I leaned back in my chair, memories flooding back. 10 years ago, I'd walked away from that company, from my inheritance, with nothing but determination and a dream. Now, as CEO of Phoenix Ventures, I controlled a $500 million investment firm that specialized in exactly the kinds of innovative technologies my father had dismissed. Alex? Sarah's voice snapped me back to the present. What do you want to do? I looked out my window at the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, my father was probably sitting in his study, trying to figure out how it had all gone wrong. Set up a meeting, I said. But not with my father. I want to meet with the board directly. The last decade had been a whirlwind. After leaving my family, I'd thrown myself into building Phoenix Ventures from the ground up. Starting with my saved $50,000, I'd focus on identifying promising tech startups and sustainable energy companies that traditional firms overlooked. Daniel had supported me every step of the way, taking extra tutoring jobs to help with our living expenses while I got the company off the ground. We lived in a tiny apartment, saved every penny, and slowly built our dream. My first big break came 2 years in, when one of our early investments, a small solar technology company, was bought by a major energy corporation. The return was substantial enough to attract serious investors, and from there, Phoenix Ventures grew exponentially. We had our struggles, of course. The first few years were lean, and there were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But with each success, each correct market prediction, our reputation grew. I never used the Harrison name to open doors. As far as the business world was concerned, I was just Alexandra Chen, having taken Daniel's last name when we married. My success was my own, built without my family's connections or influence. Now, a decade later, Phoenix Ventures was known for its forward-thinking investment strategy and impressive returns. We had offices in 3 cities, a team of brilliant analysts, and a portfolio that read like a who's who of emerging technologies. And my father's company wanted to talk about a strategic partnership. The meeting was set for the following week. I arrived early, walking into the Harrison Investment Group's boardroom for the first time in 10 years. The portraits of past CEOs still hung on the walls, my grandfather, my father, and the empty space where my portrait should have been. The board members filed in, many of them the same men who had attended that fateful gala a decade ago. They didn't recognize me at first. Why would they? The Alexandra Harrison they remembered was a young heiress in designer dresses. The woman before them now was a successful CEO in a power suit, known for her shrewd business acumen. My father entered last, stopping short when he saw me. He had aged considerably, his hair now completely gray, new lines etched deeply around his mouth. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, shock, perhaps even pride. But it was quickly replaced by his usual mask of control. "What is this?" he demanded, looking at the board chairman. "Mr. Harrison," the chairman said carefully, "this is Alexandra Chen, CEO of Phoenix Ventures. They're interested in discussing acquisition terms." Acquisition. My father's face reddened. "You mean takeover? And you didn't think to inform me who would be attending this meeting?" "I asked them not to," I said, keeping my voice professional. I wanted the board to hear our proposal without preconceptions. Sarah began presenting our offer, a fair but firm valuation of Harrison Investment Group, with terms that would protect the employees while transitioning the company into the modern era. As she spoke, I watched my father's face. I could see him struggling to reconcile the daughter he'd dismissed with the businesswoman before him. The numbers Sarah was presenting were impossible to argue with. Phoenix Ventures had the capital, the strategy, and the vision to save his company. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence. Finally, my father spoke, his voice rough. "May I have a moment alone with Ms. Chen?" The board members filed out, leaving us alone in the room where I'd spent countless hours learning about business at my father's knee. "You did all this to prove me wrong?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, Dad. I did this to prove myself right. Everything you taught me about business, about identifying opportunities, about building something lasting, I took those lessons and applied them to the future, not the past." He walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Your grandfather, he would have understood what you've built. He was an innovator too, in his time." He turned back to me. "I was the one who forgot that innovation is part of our legacy. It's not too late, I said. Phoenix Ventures doesn't want to dismantle Harrison Investment Group. We want to help it evolve, to honor its history while embracing the future. And Daniel? He asked. Is he still teaching physics, I said, allowing myself a small smile. Still changing lives. We have 2 kids now, your grandchildren, but you've never met them. Emma's 7, Michael's 5. Something broke in my father's expression. Alexandra, I know, I said softly. Me too. The acquisition went through smoothly. The board voted unanimously to accept our offer, recognizing that Phoenix Ventures represented their best chance at survival. My father, to everyone's surprise, supported the decision. In the end, we didn't just save Harrison Investment Group. We transformed it. The combined companies under the Phoenix Harrison Group banner became one of the most influential investment firms in the country, known for balancing traditional wisdom with innovative strategy. My father stayed on as an advisor, though he stepped down as CEO. Slowly, cautiously, we began rebuilding our relationship. He and my mother met their grandchildren. They came to dinner at our house, not the mansion I could have afforded, but the comfortable home Daniel and I had chosen in a good school district. One evening, after a particularly successful quarter, my father and I were sitting in my office, looking out at the city lights. You know, he said, your grandfather used to say something about true wealth. Being about the courage to build something meaningful, I finished. I remember. He nodded, looking at me with what I finally recognized as pride. He would have been proud of you, Alexandra. We both are, even if I was too stubborn to see it sooner. I thought about the journey from that night at the gala to this moment, about all the lessons learned, the bridges burned and rebuilt, the legacy redefined. The funny thing is, I said, I'm not sure I would change anything. Every struggle, every setback, it all led to this, to building something that's truly mine, truly meaningful. My father was quiet for a moment. You know, I always thought I was protecting our family's legacy. But you understood something I didn't. Legacy isn't about preserving the past. It's about building a better future. Later that night, as I drove home to Daniel and our children, I thought about wealth, real wealth, not the kind that sits in trust funds or hangs in portraits on boardroom walls, but the kind that comes from having the courage to follow your heart and the determination to build something meaningful. My children would inherit a different kind of legacy than the one I was born into. They would learn that true success isn't about what you're given, but what you build. That love is worth more than money, and that sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining something better. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Daniel teaching Emma about constellations in the backyard, Michael perched on his shoulders. The sight made me smile, remembering that night 10 years ago when I chose this life over my inheritance. It was the best investment I ever made.
Dad, what are you doing here? I shouted because there he was, lying in an old, worn-out tent in the yard under the blazing sun. It reminded me of the tents from my childhood. Ah, don't worry about it. It's the usual thing, Dad replied weakly, leaving me speechless. Since he hurt his leg, he's been living with my brother and his wife. Whenever I called, my brother said Dad was fine, and his wife would laugh and say she was taking good care of him. They told me I couldn't talk to Dad because he wasn't good with technology and had made new friends at the hospital, so he was enjoying life. But seeing Dad lying there looking so weak, I realized my brother and his wife were lying. Dad slowly raised his hand and pointed toward a direction. I saw my home. I'm single and my parents' house is in the city, but I moved to the countryside to work at a resort hotel, chasing my dream. My parents had a car accident 2 years ago. Only Mom died, but Dad injured his leg and got really depressed after losing her. They were always together and known as a loving couple in the neighborhood. Dad liked staying home, but he would travel because Mom loved it. On the way back from one of their trips, they had the accident, and only Dad survived. Why did I survive instead of her? Dad would say, feeling guilty every day. His injury made him stay indoors even more. Since I was working, I couldn't take care of him as much as I wanted. Seeing him so sad made me feel terrible, but luckily I have a brother who is 7 years older than me. My brother Anthony and his wife, Mia, live close to our parents' home and would check on us sometimes. Dad's gotten a lot weaker, hasn't he? I said. They were a loving couple after all. It's understandable. We live nearby, so Emma, don't worry and focus on your work, Anthony replied. Thank you, I said, feeling grateful. Lately I've been affected by the recession and my income has dropped a lot. I need to start saving soon. How about you, Emma? Anthony asked with a sigh. I'm actually doing pretty well. Thanks to tourists coming back, I've been really busy lately. Unlike my brother, the overtime pay has helped a lot, so I haven't been struggling financially. In fact, I've had a raise and think I'm earning more than most of my peers. However, not having private time has been tough. This was the first time my brother had talked about his financial situation. He said they've had to cut back on food expenses and are barely getting by each day. He hasn't bought clothes in over a year, and they haven't gone on any trips either. They wanted children, but with their current situation it's not possible. I was worried they were really struggling. Then, during a conversation at his house, Anthony mentioned, Dad's leg has gotten much worse, and he needs more support. We're thinking about living together so we can take care of him. Mia added, we were thinking it would save us money, and we could take care of Dad at the same time. I appreciate it. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help, I said gratefully. Thank you, Emma. Good luck with your work, Maya replied warmly. So to save money and look after Dad, my brother and his wife decided to move in with him. Dad and my brother didn't have the best relationship to start with. When Anthony was a student, he used to come home late, and Dad would often scold him. Over time, they drifted apart, and after Anthony finished college, he rarely visited. I hadn't seen them talk much since Anthony became an adult, so it was surprising that he was now positive about living with Dad. It seemed clear they were facing financial difficulties. The idea of saving on rent and living costs made sense, especially since I, living alone, understood the appeal. But I couldn't help feeling anxious about whether they would truly take good care of Dad, especially since I couldn't visit home often due to work. I regularly called Anthony instead. Hey Anthony, how's Dad doing? He's been smiling more these days. I feel bad leaving all the caregiving to you. It must be tough. It's been 3 months now, and we've adjusted to living together. At first I was worried, but it seemed my brother and his wife were committed to taking care of Dad, so I could focus on my work without worries. Several years passed, and after summer vacation ended, I decided to visit my hometown for the first time in a while. I called Anthony beforehand to let them know I was coming. Hey Anthony, it's been a while. Oh, it has been. How are you? Think you'll be able to come home this year? Anthony asked cheerfully. Yeah, things have settled down at work, so I'm planning to come home for a few days, I replied. That's great to hear. Travel safely, he said. Thanks. Please let Dad and Mia know I'm coming, I said before hanging up. I tried calling Dad too, but couldn't reach him. I let Anthony know and finally headed home for the first time in years. It was the longest I had been away since Mom passed away. I used to worry about Dad and tried to visit during holidays, but I hadn't been able to in a long time. Knowing Anthony and Mia were there gave me some comfort. The city home felt much hotter than where I lived. As I arrived, sweating from the heat, I noticed an unfamiliar old tent in the front yard. Was there really a tent? I wondered aloud, puzzled by its presence. Curious yet apprehensive, I approached it and sensed someone inside. Hurriedly, I made my way in the family home. I'm back, I announced. Welcome back, Emma. You look pale. What's wrong? Mia exclaimed, noticing my expression. I think there's someone in the tent, I blurted out hastily to Mia, who had just welcomed me home. Her response caught me off guard. Oh, that's Dad, Maya replied calmly. What? Dad is in that tent on such a hot day? I exclaimed, rushing to check inside. There I found Dad lying down, looking like he had collapsed. Mia, I'm calling an ambulance. Dad seems exhausted, I said urgently. No need to call an ambulance, Mia insisted firmly. It's Dad's choice to live in the garden. There's nothing to worry about, she added, sounding resolute. Dad looked fatigued on such a hot day, yet he wants to live in the garden. The man who preferred being indoors even when Mom was healthy. Dad always said the best place in summer was a cool room and a warm one in winter. It didn't make sense for him to want to be outside in this heat. Something felt wrong. An uneasy feeling crept over me. I hurried to the tent where Dad was and spoke to him directly. Dad, what happened? Are you okay? I asked with concern. Emma, it's nothing. Just the usual. I'm fine, Dad replied weakly. Do you stay out here in this heat every day? Why don't you come inside? When I pressed him, Dad pointed slowly towards the main house. That used to be my room. Since I moved in with Anthony and Mia, I've been staying in a closet, Dad revealed, shocking me. In a closet? I thought they were taking good care of you, I said, feeling bewildered and concerned. Not once have they taken care of me properly. Their decision to live together was solely for their own savings, Dad revealed bitterly. I've told them countless times how much I hate staying in the closet because of my leg, Dad continued. Their response was to tell me if I didn't like it, I should live outside. That's why they'd left me out here in the garden with this old tent during this sweltering heat. Dad's words were a painful narrative I wished I could block out. It was now clear that there was discord between my brother and Dad. I blamed myself for trusting Anthony. Mia, too, was not the nurturing type I had hoped for. I recalled how Anthony used to complain about her frequent nights out drinking until the early hours. This couple, who boasted about dining out every single day and never cooking at home, were clearly ill-suited to taking care of Dad. Yet foolishly, I had expected more from them. This is unacceptable. I'm here now, and I've got you, I declared firmly. It was shocking to uncover how badly they had treated Dad. Despite their assurances of good care over the phone, they had confined him to a closet and then banished him to the yard. Anger surged through me, unforgiving and intense. Ignoring Mia's protests, I dialed for an ambulance. There's no me for that. Please, don't make a scene, my brother's wife pleaded desperately, but I paid no heed. When the ambulance arrived, they took Dad to the hospital, and I accompanied him. Dad was on the brink of heat stroke, but thankfully it wasn't life-threatening. However, due to neglect in providing proper meals and maintaining hygiene, he needed hospitalization. Dad, rest now. Take your time to recover, I reassured him as he settled in. Then he replied, Emma, you're my lifesaver. I was ready to join your mom every day. He looked relieved. What are you saying? We need you here with us for much longer. Realizing Dad had been living each day as if it were his last, tears welled up in my eyes, but I kept a smile on my face for him. I returned to the family home to gather some things for Dad's hospital stay. Anthony, Mia, you need to explain yourselves about Dad. I confronted my brother and his wife, seething with anger about how Dad had been treated. We were just trying to push him away, hoping he'd leave on his own, Mia confessed casually. Yeah, surprisingly he was stubborn and wouldn't leave, Anthony said casually, almost as if it were a joke. It was clear they knew they had treated Dad cruelly. They chuckled as they recounted their attempts to push him away. Are you even hearing yourselves? Dad's life is at stake here. If anything had happened to him, you could have been held responsible, I exclaimed, unable to contain my disbelief and anger. You're exaggerating. We did give him food and checked on him once a day, Anthony replied dismissively, as if Dad was just some animal they were dealing with. He's in the hospital now because he wasn't properly cared for. Do you understand what you've done? It's outrageous to kick him out of his own home, I retorted, frustration evident in my voice. My brother and his wife showed no remorse and started making excuses for their actions. We didn't choose to live here. Financial struggles forced us to move in, but caregiving turned out to be much harder than we expected, Mia explained. That's why we considered placing him in a facility, but Dad strongly opposed leaving this house full of memories of Mom. He even tried to kick us out. They pleaded to me, casting themselves as victims. They struggled with caregiving and attempted to convince Dad to leave, but instead, they found themselves on the brink of being forced out. Having rent-free accommodation is crucial for us, so we couldn't let Dad kick us out, Anthony justified their actions. I never imagined my brother would stoop so low as to deliberately worsen Dad's care and quality of life just to secure the house for himself. Despite Dad and my brother not being close, I had trusted that as an adult in his mid-30s, he would manage Dad's care responsibly. It was terrifying to realize they had devised such a cruel strategy. Moreover, my brother confessed that by confining Dad to the closet or forcing him into the yard when I visited, they were trying to manipulate Dad into choosing to live with me instead. Living in the countryside is better for his health anyway, so we were planning to send him to live with you, my brother admitted. We thought he'd leave on his own before you got here, but he held on, Mia chuckled, as if reminiscing about a challenging game. Now that you're back, Dad will probably say he wants to live with you, Anthony laughed, casually dropping this bombshell. Then he said something outrageous. Now that Dad's in the hospital, this house belongs to us, so pack your things and leave. I was so appalled by his audacity that I was at a loss for words. To think he could say such a thing while living in someone else's house. I gathered Dad's belongings and went back to the hospital. Dad, I heard about what happened from Anthony. It must have been tough, I said gently. Dad sighed, expressing his despair. Trying to drive them out of the house backfired on me. That house is a treasure filled with memories of your mom. I couldn't just hand it over to people like them. His enduring love for Mom still gave him strength, which was reassuring. Don't worry, Dad, we'll figure this out together. You're not alone in this, I reassured him, determined to make things right for him. Don't worry about the house, we'll figure something out. You might need to stay in the hospital for a bit longer, but would you like to live with me after you're discharged? I suggested. Dad's face lit up with relief. Thank you. If you're okay with it, I'd be happy to live together. After Dad agreed to live with me, I returned to my place. 2 months later, I started receiving a barrage of calls from Anthony. There are a bunch of unknown men in the house. What's going on? Anthony demanded furiously. Without replying, I handed the phone to someone else. The person who took over was our maternal grandfather. Hey Anthony, I've heard the story from Emma. You've done something terrible to my dear son-in-law. When grandfather spoke, Anthony sounded shocked. Our family home was actually built by grandfather as a wedding gift for mom when she was young. Dad, who was adopted into the family, was always treated by grandfather as if he were his own son. When I told grandfather about the situation, he was furious and sent over some of his strongest apprentices to drive out my brother and his wife. After the commotion, I called grandfather, who owns the land and the house. Grandfather has always been imposing, and Anthony has always been afraid of him. I believed he could help us out of this mess. Anthony, all your stuff has been arranged to be sent to Mia's parents' house, grandfather said firmly. Don't just go ahead with things on your own, Anthony protested, though his voice was tinged with fear. You're the one who acted out of line. Now deal with the consequences, grandfather retorted sharply. A person who treated their family like that has no right to argue. Do you have any complaints? Grandfather said firmly. No, sir. I'm sorry, Anthony replied and didn't argue back. After that, grandfather was always kind to me but very strict with Anthony as he grew up. If Anthony cried, grandfather would spank him, which made him cry more and get scolded even more. What was okay in the past is now considered wrong. Watching Anthony, I often felt glad to be a girl. Even though Anthony would rebel against Dad, he never dared to go against grandfather. This time too, he tried to resist a little, but grandfather quickly took control, showing that my brother couldn't match him. Anthony and Mia's belongings were sent to Mia's parents' house as grandfather had arranged. When they arrived, it was clear they hadn't been there in a long time. Hey Dad, I think our stuff has arrived, so we came to pick it up, Mia said. Mia's dad came out from the back room. I've heard everything from Anthony's sister. You two are going to live with us from now on. It's okay, we'll live at my family home, Mia replied. Don't even think about coming back after treating your father like that. I'll fix your bad attitude, Mia's dad said angrily. I had heard that Mia's dad was very strict. After explaining everything to him, Anthony and Mia had no choice but to live under his strict rules. Mia learned to cook from scratch and had to prepare meals for the family every day. Anthony got permission for a side job and helped Mia's dad with his work on weekends. After Dad was discharged from the hospital, grandfather told him the house needed repairs because of some damage. Determined to fix the house filled with memories of Mom, Dad committed himself to rehabilitation and recovered impressively. You did great with the rehab. The doctors were even surprised by how quickly you recovered, I said. Of course, it's the house filled with memories of your mom, so I need to put my all into fixing it, Dad replied with a brightness in his voice like in the old days. It seemed his love for Mom helped Dad recover. With grandfather's instructions and the help of his apprentices, we gradually repaired the house. While fixing the house, Dad seemed to regain the sparkle he had when Mom was alive. You seem really lively, I said. Working on the house brings back a lot of memories, and it feels like I'm talking to your mom. I felt like she had gone far away, but maybe she's been nearby all along, watching over me. Hearing Dad talk like that almost brought tears to my eyes. Despite the horrible treatment from my brother and his wife, maybe Mom really was protecting him. Eventually, the house repairs were completed. When the repairs were done, Dad decided to let go of the house. Dad, are you sure? I felt like Mom said it's okay not to cling to this house anymore. Plus, now that it's so beautifully done, I really want someone to live in it, he spoke calmly. I see. I think she would be happy too. Thanks to the renovations Dad and the team made, a buyer was quickly found. Because of all this, Dad and grandfather decided to move into nursing homes. I've started visiting more often. Dad, how are you? I'm having a great time every day. Made a lot of friends too. It's all thanks to you, Emma. Really, thank you, Dad said with a smile. Dad seemed to be enjoying his days with the other residents, making the time I spent with him even more precious. I've been living more peacefully every day. As for Anthony and Mia, we've gotten used to Dad's discipline, and it's quite comfortable this way, Mia said. Yeah, he's not strict all the time, and the house is big. It's great, Anthony added, seeming to enjoy their lifestyle too. Being relieved from caregiving, we're actually lucky, Mia said happily. Thanks to this, we're living a good life despite our low income. I feel so grateful. My brother and his wife had adjusted to living at Mia's parents' house and were happy to be free from caregiving responsibilities, showing no signs of regret. But then Mia's dad, furious at their lack of remorse, kicked them out. There's no remorse from you, so you might as well leave, Mia's dad said quietly yet angrily. Pack your things and leave immediately. He expelled them without allowing any discussion. Accustomed to living at home without saving money, they found themselves homeless and desperate. Until they could afford the initial costs for a new place, they lived in an old tent in the park during winter. It's freezing. We're in this situation because your income is so low, Mia blamed Anthony. The tent is from home, but I bought you a new sleeping bag, so stop complaining. I've been working 7 days a week without a break, Anthony retorted irritably. With the money from his side job already spent, they had nothing left. How about we contact Emma and ask if we can live with her in the countryside? Anthony suggested without much concern. Soon after, Anthony called to inform me they had been kicked out of Mia's parents' house and were now sleeping in a cold park. My brother, who had previously made fun of my rural lifestyle, was now pleading to live with me. Knowing how badly he treated our father, I couldn't bring myself to help him, so I refused. I decided to block all future communications to avoid any further trouble. I can only hope they realize that their actions have consequences.